We have 3 sessions. We have a clicker. No, we have a clicker, but you can print here for the forward and the red one for the back.
Okay, so the dean?
That will work. And for the setup, maybe since you have one keynote, you can stand here, or would you want podium for yourself?
No, I'll present, and I think we want to have the session, session 1. Let's take this away. But I'm not.
Oh, you're not the person.
Who should be one here?
돌샷 있을까요? 오늘은 없으면 그냥 어제 있었어요.
It's fine.
그러면 위쪽이라고 이가 어차피 오늘 마지막인데 5개만 필요하고
이건 어디다 넣었대요?
오늘의 이가 이거 빨리 빼서 아니야 그냥 리저브로 왔다 갔다 해야 돼서 시간이라도 일을 줄이고 오늘의 네, 맞습니다.
케냐콘인데
Everton Bourne
Good afternoon. We are gonna be starting in just a couple of minutes. So just I ask you for your patience, another 5 minutes and then we'll get going. Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, go for it. Good afternoon. We can get going. My name is Ferruccio Santetti. I'm the Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean at the Global Green Growth Institute. Thank you for joining today's session. We've got a couple of hours ahead of us to discuss sustainable finance. We really hope this to be a discussion. We have panelists, we have experts joining to share with us their experience, their knowledge, but we really hope to make this a bit more interactive than usual and maybe even a bit more informal than previous sessions and previous days. So it's an invite to all of you that have taken the time to remain in the room and to participate in today's sessions, to please do feel free to actively participate, raise your hand, feel free to ask questions, especially uncomfortable questions, yeah, and difficult questions to our panelists. It's a great honor to introduce Gerard O'Donoghue, which I now realize I think is the first time I pronounce your last name out loud. I hope I did a good job. Okay, the Deputy Director General at the Global Green Growth Institute to give us an introduction to today's session. Thank you. If you can please welcome Jerry to the podium.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Excellencies, colleagues, partners, friends, welcome to this strategic session on sustainable finance and what we do with GGGI. We're meeting at a time not only of great urgency, but also of possibilities. Urgency because when you look at the numbers, they're stark. The global gap to finance sustainable development goals is now estimated at $4 trillion every year. The gap is not closing. In many cases, it's widening. That means now that countries are being asked to deliver climate resilience, protect nature, create jobs, modernize infrastructure, and do it all with shrinking fiscal space and rising debt levels. But I also say it's a time of possibility, because in the last few months, the international community has begun to move. So at the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development in Seville, governments, development banks, public finance institutions recognized that the current system is not delivering at either the pace or the scale required. So they called for the reform of the international financial architecture, for tripling multilateral development bank lendings, for more affordable finance for vulnerable countries, and for new instruments that connect debt relief, climate ambition, and biodiversity protection. In November at COP30, climate finance will again be at the heart and at the centre of the COP. COP30 is being framed very deliberately as an implementation COP. A COP where commitments must translate into delivery on the ground, especially for those who are most exposed to climate impact and least responsible for causing them. So this is what we're here to discuss today. And this is not just a theoretical discussion about mobilizing trillions in climate finance. This is about looking at what's working now, where it is working, and how we can scale it. GGGI's role, our role in this space is quite simple. We sit in countries, we work with ministries of finance, planning, energy, environment, and we help them turn policies into projects into investments. Finance is not the end goal, so raising finance is not the end goal. Finance is the means to deliver clean energy, resilient infrastructure, forest protection, food security, and inclusive jobs. Since 2017, GGGI has helped mobilize in excess of $15 billion in green and climate-aligned investments in support of our member countries' priorities, including NDCs, SDGs, and biodiversity goals. We have done this by structuring innovative financial instruments and mechanisms with both the public and private sector at the international, national, and subnational level. So today's sessions are built around three challenges that we believe define the next phase of climate and development finance. The first challenge is subnational finance. Everybody, and we all talk about domestic resource mobilization, and we all talk about country ownership. But ultimately, services are delivered, that's water, sanitation, waste management, transport, basic resilience by local governments and by national development banks that operate close to the real economy. National development banks are already some of the biggest providers of climate finance in emerging economies. And for example, they provide roughly 2/3 of the financing that goes into agriculture and the forestry sector. So if we do not equip these institutions and these levels of government, we will not close either the SDG gap or the climate gap. In practice, that means giving subnational actors access to instruments that historically only sovereigns could use, whether that be green bonds, resilient bonds, sustainability-linked loans, access to guarantees and first loss capital, and also clear regulatory frameworks that allows local entities to raise and deploy climate-aligned finance transparently and credibly. So we're divided into three panels today. The first panel will look exactly at how countries are empowering municipalities, national development banks, and other quasi-sovereign actors to finance climate action locally. Not for 2035, but now and in the next budget cycle. So today we will hear from leaders from Uganda, Benin, from Central America Bank for Economic Integration, CABI, and CFA Institute on what it takes to make subnational and domestic capital markets part of the solution. So that was the first challenge, subnational finance. The second challenge is resilient, nature-positive infrastructure development. Infrastructure is where climate risks becomes visible. When a bridge falls after a flood, when a hospital loses power during a cyclone, when an informal settlement is hit by a landslide and there's no drainage, that is where climate change stops being a model and becomes a political crisis. The global community has been very clear: we cannot keep financing infrastructure that is blind to physical climate risk, blind to biodiversity loss, and blind to social inclusion. Future infrastructure must be resilient, low carbon, and fair. This, of course, is very easy to say, but hard to do. So it requires 1, procurement rules that value resilience; 2, contracts that embed nature-based solutions and social safeguards from day one and not as an afterthought; 3, it requires blended finance structures where public money de-risks early stages and private capital comes in once projects are bankable. And it increasingly, number 4, requires digital and AI-enabled asset management so that we can monitor performance and resilience across the full life of an asset, not just at groundbreaking. So our second panel will focus on this shift, how development banks, ministries, and regional institutions are starting to mainstream climate and nature standards and clauses into infrastructure deals, and how the resilience is moving from being a nice to have to being a core condition of financing. We'll hear perspectives from CAF, from the Caribbean, from UAE, and from the New Development Bank of Resilient Prosperity. The third challenge is the sovereign debt trap. Too many countries are now caught in a vicious loop. Climate shock erodes fiscal space. Limited fiscal space blocks investment in resilience. Lack of resilience makes the next shock more expensive. At the same time, biodiversity losses accelerating and governments are told to protect ecosystems that they cannot afford to manage. We cannot ask countries to choose between paying bondholders or protecting their biodiversity and natural capital. We are, however, seeing debt for nature and debt for climate swaps, climate resilient debt clauses that pauses payments after a shock, sustainability linked instruments that tie the cost of sovereign finance to measurable environmental outcomes, and new conversations with credit rating agencies on how to value resilience. GDGI has been involved directly in helping governments explore and execute these solutions, from work on debt swaps that channels hundreds of millions of dollars into ecosystem protection, to setting up national financial vehicles that can actually absorb and deploy that finance domestically with integrity. So our third panel will bring voices from Ecuador, Fiji, Kenya, Korea, and global rating agencies to ask a very direct question. How do we redesign sovereign finance so that protecting nature and building resilience are not punished by markets, but rewarded by markets? And I think across all three panels, I want you also to listen to three very distinct themes. First is country leadership. Every successful transaction we're going to discuss today started with a very clear government mandate. Nothing works without national ownership. Second, integrity. Whether we're talking about green bonds, carbon markets, or debt swaps, credibility matters. If we lose trust, we lose the market. That is why GDGI's Sustainable Finance and Investment Results Guidelines put so much emphasis on verifiable commitments, additionality, transparency, and impact reporting. We apply these standards to ourselves because our member states and our partners deserve confidence that every dollar mobilized is real, traceable, and aligned with other priorities, with their priorities. And the third thing I'd like people to take into account is implementation. As I said earlier, COP30 in Belém will not be judged by the quality of its press releases. It will be judged by whether countries leave with tools, partners, and financing commitments they need to deliver on their NDCs, protect their forests and oceans, and build resilient, inclusive economies. That is the measure that matters. So let me close with this. The world has moved past the stage where climate finance is a side conversation. It is now the core development conversation about sovereignty, stability, about jobs, about dignity. Our task together is to make sure that solutions on the table today become the standard model tomorrow. Thank you, and I look forward to our discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry, for setting the stage for our first panel. We have speakers in very high demand, so we're going to bring the first panel a bit forward. We'll start earlier, and then we'll get into a presentation. So we start directly with our first panel for today's session. It's going to be moderated by Gulshan Vashist, who is GGGI's Head of Finance Strategy and Cooperation Unit. Gulshan?
Going on stage?
Yes. The first panel will be looking into subnational financing. It's a broad topic, but it's a topic that is increasingly important, and there are a few numbers that make us understand really what is the importance of national development banks, quasi-sovereign actors, and other subnational players in the financial sectors to truly understand their contribution to the climate agenda. So Jerry mentioned a few of those. National development banks account for 2/3 of the financing going to the agriculture and forestry sectors. Yeah? 2/3 of the financing going to agriculture and forestry comes from national development banks. And this is even more interesting in a way when you consider that many of these national development banks work as second-tier financial institutions. Yeah? They lend to other financial intermediaries. This means that they become a very powerful aggregator where in order to have a positive impact on the agriculture and forestry sector, you don't have to work with thousands of agriculture and forestry producers. You can work with a few second-tier national development banks to cascade safeguards, to cascade environmental and social standards to a whole value chain. If we consider the case of Latin America, for example, there are a few players like Finagro in Colombia, CONAFIPS in Ecuador, FIRA in Mexico, so national development banks with a second tier of role that account for more than 50% of the financing going to agriculture and forestry. The importance of this actor was recognized this year at the FFD4 conference, the Finance for Development conference in Spain, where subnational finance was really for the first time at the center of the conversation. So we are acknowledging more the role of subnational actors in ensuring the funding is channeled to national priorities, but we are still very much behind. If we think about the Green Climate Fund, the GCF structure that channels funding through accredited entities, when you look at how much of the GCF funding is channeled through direct access entities versus international access entities, less than 20% of GCF financing is channeled through direct access entities, most of which are national development banks. Yeah? So 80% of the GCF financing, 80% of the financing from the world's largest climate fund is channeled through international financial institutions and multilateral development banks, right? That's not what we want, that's not what the GCF wants, that's not what countries want. So that's a bit to set, again, the stage for the first panel. Gulshan, over to you to introduce our first set of panelists.
Thank you so much, Ferro, and as Jerry and Hugh rightly set the scene for really looking at unlocking subnational financing to close the NDC and SDG financing gaps. For the panel, we have with us Honorable His Excellency Amos Lugulobi, the Minister of State Planning, Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development of Uganda. Sir, if you can please take the stage. Followed by Madam Adijatu Hassan, Deputy Chief of Staff at the Ministry of Economy and Finance of Benin and President of the Carbon Project Registration Authority. Welcome. We have Ms. Jae-Jin Lee, Head of Korea Office, Central American Bank for Economic Integration, CABE. Welcome, Ms. Lee. We have Mr. David Wanif, Director of Global Industry Standards, CFA Institute. Hi, David. Right. So let's get straight, and I'm going to keep it as informal as possible. Ferro, we can take questions. If there's any comment, you can raise your hand, and I'm happy to take a question, pass the question to the panelists. So we'll keep to that. Ferro, I promise. I have a question for all the panelists. We're hearing more about the need to reform the global financial architecture, but the key part really is right at the home, mobilizing domestic capital through quasi-sovereign and subnational entities, national development banks. A lot of that was spoken earlier. So from your organization's perspective, from your governments, how can subnational actors be better supported to mobilize private capital and other sources of financing for sustainable investments? Maybe we start with you, David, on that one.
All right, thank you. I guess good to start with me on this one, because I think they'll have a lot more to say than I would on this topic.
Okay.
But I think there's a couple different things, right? If you think about the subnational level and getting down, to that level, I think the challenges there still center around finding proper bankable projects and kind of credit worthiness and trustworthiness. But there's also some behavioral issues that have to be addressed from the players in the field as well. And some of that might have to come through changes in regulation. So if you think about, pension funds and some of the bigger players, when they think about topics like impact investing or transition finance that could go against their mandates, especially in some of the developed markets. So allowing them to have some percentage dedicated to these topics without necessarily maybe giving them some advantage towards their risk ratios, or giving them a little bit of playroom in terms of set aside 1 or 2% for these, and that can be treated differently. Could be some interesting ways of addressing that topic.
Excellent. Maybe I look at CABE from your experience, Ms. Lee. Can you share with us how you are engaging with subnational actors to support mobilizing private capital and other sources of financing?
Sure. Thank you for the question. And just for everyone to be on the same page about our institution, let me introduce what CABE is. Central American Bank for Economic Integration is a multilateral development bank based out of Honduras that focuses in the development of Central America, that is owned by 50 member countries spanning over Europe, Asia, and Latin America. And that is really focused on development of Central America from Guatemala down to Panama. And Korea is one of the major shareholders as well. And our mission is to promote a regional integration in Central America, as well as sustainable development, with highlighting social inclusion and also climate action, as well as private sector engagement. That has been our 2025 to 2029 strategic focus. And as we mentioned about filling the gap of the subnational financing for filling up the needs for to achieve the goals of the SDG, I think the MDBs play a big role, the catalytic role in filling that gap. Obviously, I think Faru actually mentioned about GCF providing 80% of that capital to MDBs or the IFIs, and the national banks getting like the 20% to be able to mobilize those capital is because there is clearly higher perceived risks at the subnational level, and therefore very hesitant for a global level climate funds to be able to directly fund these national level governments or the municipalities. Therefore, you need MDBs, and that's the biggest role that MDBs can actually play, to be able to be the accredited entity and to be the mediator of that sort. And what we do is we actually have a combined elements of three things which make it work for subnational entities as well as the municipalities and the local agencies to access these financings, which are first the concessional financing, which I'm sure everyone here is very familiar with, and the de-risking instruments, as well as the technical assistance. I think three things combined are the very important elements of making sure that the municipalities and the local agencies do access financing. And de-risking instruments do include things like the unlending, the guarantees, as well as the co-financing mechanisms. And we have, for example, we have ProMuni program, which is like the regional financial intermediation program, which CABE channels the resources to the the national development banks, so that the local domestic banks can access them to be able to fund their municipal infrastructure as well as the public services. So I think that's the way we actually provide these services directly for them to access better financing under single credit with longer credit terms. And obviously technical assistance is another thing that we're pretty generous about as well at the bank, to be able to prepare the projects better. And that's the key of the mixture of the three elements, the concessional financing as well as the technical assistance, and the de-risking instruments are the things that we provide to make sure that the subnational governments do access financing to tackle these climate challenges. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lee. project preparation, technical assistance, de-risking mechanisms, and more support to the subnational. Those are the key kind of fundamental support that CAPE provides, and that is all what I captured at the moment. I will get into deeper question on that later on the second round, but thank you for giving your remarks. I'm just looking at Madam Hassan, if you could kindly share your experience about how do we support subnational governments in Benin's case?
Yes, thank you for the question and good afternoon, everyone. I would say that you mentioned it, I mean, reforming the global architecture of financing in our region, it's mandatory if you want to reach the population. So, and in Benin, we believe that this reform must start at home, right? We have built since now almost 10 years credibility in the market, international market, a strong credibility. But now that credibility has also to be transformed into local delivery. And what we are trying to do and what we believe in, it's a top-down approach. Mrs. Lee was mentioning, yes, building the capacity into the local community is true. But what we have done, we start first at the level of the national entities, like the government, build the capacity by having a strategy aligned with SDG at the top level, being able to mobilize financing, sustainable finance and SDG finance in the capital market, and that money has been has been populated and flowed to the local project by enforcing and empowering public-private partnership, and also building the capacity in terms of monitoring, because with that SDG bond that we have issued in 2021, we managed to build a monitoring infrastructure that allowed even the local community to be able to have criteria, indicator to be able to follow such a financing. So one is to build the capacity at the national level, and then secondly, to bring that capacity to subnational entities, which will be able in the nearest future, we'll be able to directly mobilize financing. And we have also some local and national entity like Fonds National pour l'Environnement et le Climat, which is a GCF accredited entity. But I would say that with a small to medium size project that can mobilize like 10 million, but when you look at our pipeline, we need more than 10 million. So how are we building the capacity of that accredited entity to be able now to be accredited for 200 to 250? It's come at the ministry level. So that's what we are doing. We are building our national budget aligned with SDGs. All the budget in Benin are aligned with SDGs, and that budget is going to the local community, local entities, cities, region. They are following the same. And I can also say that this allowed us to mobilize capital at national level, building capacity at local level, because it's not opportunities that we are missing. We are meeting the scaling up of that opportunities. So for us, we believe that bringing at home, it starts first by having a strong capacity at the national level, and this is what we are doing.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing Benin's example. I will come back to you and we get deeper into capacity building and how that is really trickling from the national to the subnational level. Just looking at Minister Lugolubi, if we can please share Uganda's experience on how are we supporting the subnational governments to get access to sustainable finance.
Thank you so much, Mr. Moderator. My ministry is the ministry in charge of planning, the finance and the economic development. So it's the biggest ministry in our government because everything starts with planning And that planning is coordinated across the country from national to subnational levels. It's usually a highly consultative process. So my ministry is very well positioned to capture all the subnational issues related to the green economy, including coordinating the private sector development. We have various programs within our National Development Plan, which is put together by my ministry. Now, the program is laid within this National Development Plan, and which is linked to the budgeting system and resource allocation. So largely everything is centrally coordinated and then decentralized through these various subnational systems. So the implementation of all these programs can therefore be adequately coordinated at the center. Now we have been talking about the climate finance unit. This climate finance unit is within the Ministry of Finance, coordinating the various actors in terms of mobilizing resources which they use to run those various programs. Of course, the various subnational units are allowed to raise what we call local revenues. But these revenues are very minimal, to do much of what we want to really see. So it's the issue is that most of the resources come from the center and taken to the subnational levels to implement these various programs. And as you know, we recently launched the National Green Taxonomy, which is really guiding interventions in the private sector as well as the public institutions at that local level. So this is largely the involvement of our ministry, but also we have the ministry that is in charge of water and the environment, which is playing a very big role in terms of environmental related issues, and it actually accesses resources also from the center to support largely issues related to water. And you know that there are also various other ministries like the Ministry of Energy. So all energy resources are sent to the Ministry of Energy. It's also the ministry in charge of minerals. So all these entities are coordinated in terms of resource mobilization by the Ministry of Finance, are helping the government to implement those various programs through the center and through the decentralized units, which are the subnational governments.
Thank you so much. Definitely revenues play a huge part. There's also a lot that Uganda is doing to prepare themselves to get access to sustainable finance from global channels that are available. We'll get to that in a bit. I want to go back to first set of questions and want to start with Madam Hassan. Benin has truly become a regional pioneer in deploying these innovative instruments, particularly you mentioned your experience getting access to capital markets. Could you share the key enabling conditions? Of course, you mentioned about capacity building and taking that, trickling that from the national to the subnational, but can we probably touch upon the policy, institutional or market-based conditions that made it possible to attract private and public capitals for your green transition? Over to you.
Yes, sure. I think that first of all, I would say that Benin's success lays on consistency, and we build an enabling environment for around 3 pillars. So the first one is the policy alignment. The second one is the institutional innovation, and the third one is the market credibility. In terms of policy alignment, as I was saying, is we build a framework, a SDG, a sustainable framework that is aligned with our debt strategy, but also our budget strategy. And when you do so, you are able to follow all the proceed and the use of the proceed from the capital mobilization, resource mobilization to the project, down to the project. And all sovereign issuance in Benin must be channeled to the project that is within our public investment plan and our national development plan. So policy alignment. And the SDG or the climate are aligned to our activity. The policy allowed us also to monitor those projects. We have a platform for, all investors that invest in Benin paper. They can go on a platform that is there to show all the impact of the project that has been financed by the bond. The platform, I can share it with you. The platform is there, and so from that policy alignment, from budget to debt management, actually is that from budget to debt management is aligned and is monitored. And then on the institutional level, in terms of innovation, we work on, I would say that several layers. The first one was the SDG framework, which allowed us to mobilize, to issue the SDG bond in 2021, and then mainly linked to sustainable goals. And then that framework allowed us also in 2023 to mobilize a SDG loan, backed by an AFDB guarantee. We were mentioning the blending and how to make the cost of financing cheaper for a country like Benin. This was one of the solution instrument that was used. And we were tackling the sustainable part. Now, to address the climate part, what we have done is to create, by a presidential decree, the National Carbon Project Registration Authority, which its main mission is to guarantee the integrity, the trust, and also that the projects that are developed in Benin, regardless if they are from the private or the public sector, they are aligned with international standards that can, for example, for a bank like yours, will allow the bank that are financing projects in Benin to make sure that we have the same standard as the international one. So that institutional innovation was to say, and I think that Minister Lugo Lundby tackled it a little, is to say, how are we making sure that the financial criteria meet also the impact and the environment? So the supervision of all those bodies are within two very important ministries, the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry in charge of Environment. So we are sure that the goals are aligned, and this dual governance between the two really has been, I would say that, a game changer in Benin. And now the third pillar I want to tackle is the market credibility. We are following up, as I was saying, you have the allocation report that you can check as an investor. We are transparent on what we are doing, the use of the proceed of all the money that is channeled to Benin through a link framework, SDG, green. You can track, you can follow, transparency, you can see exactly where the money is going and the impact that we have. So if you have, for example, a delay in a project that was under the use of proceed, its mention is tracked and you can see it as an investor. And that track record from the SDG bond to the SDG loan and as leaders also led us to have now to launch a new framework, a green bond framework, that will allow us in some months or to also now having specific project on climate resilience, renewable energy, circular economy. So we are adding to the SDGs or the project that was tackling more education, school meals. Now we are adding really a climate side that we didn't have before, but still with a framework that has a very strong international standard and that can be tracked, followed, and monitored. So this is what I can say, that how we create in Benin an ecosystem that enabling condition for our government, but also for the local to be able to mobilize capital from outside.
Thank you so much. A framework that can be tracked, followed, and monitored. I take that. But also, thank you so much for touching upon so many important aspects on de-risking with AFDB guarantee facility. Also, just the point that you make that we have the system now, and now we're really looking at how do we leverage it with another framework, and how do we really use the good work that has happened in 2021. And that's something that actually segues very well to my next question to Minister Lugolubi. Firstly, a big congratulations on the launch of Uganda's first national green taxonomy. I think that's a great feat. And the second one, of course, is the establishment of a climate finance unit in 2023. These are big milestones, and really the big indicators out to the outside world that Uganda is really looking to tread along the sustainable finance path. So how do you think, Minister, are these initiatives strengthening the enabling environment for mobilizing both public and private capital towards NDC and SDG targets? And can you share with us the lessons from Uganda's experience that could inform other African economies to follow a similar path? Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Mr. Moderator. The Climate Finance Unit model is an innovative climate governance approach that is proving to be revolutionary in accelerating climate finance mobilization. And placing this unit within the Ministry of Finance, and in our case, which ministry is also responsible for planning and economic development, I think is a very strategic decision. Every ministry has one way or the other to work with the ministry in charge of finance and in charge of planning. And therefore, positioning the climate finance unit within that ministry is a very strategic approach. That even with a situation where you cannot mobilize capital through established global institutions or through borrowing by issuance of bonds, private bonds or other instruments on the local market or international markets separately, these resources can still become part of the national budget for running the climate finance unit operations. And in our case, apart from the resources that we mobilize through, for example, GGI, we are providing our own resources mobilized through taxes and non-tax sources. So we really have to make sure that the climate finance unit remains operational and competitive. For example, it wouldn't have been possible for me to be here if this CFU was perhaps in a different ministry. So it gets direct access into the budget planning framework, the program budget budgeting tool. It's within there, and the ministry has to make sure that it functions and it coordinates all the issues relating to climate financing. And remember that this ministry is also in charge of resource mobilization generally, not only for climate-related issues, but mobilizing for all other interventions within the government. So it is best placed, to mobilize resources for these activities, although the implementation of which happens at different levels. So here you have decentralized mandates. The ministry mobilizes resources which are very central for the ministry in charge of water resources to do its activities, for the ministry in charge of energy to do its activities, for the ministry in charge of minerals to do theirs, the ones in agriculture. And the CFU would make sure that there is compliance within agreed set standards. We have, after formulating a national development plan, we have what we call, in short, it's called PIAP, Program Implementation Action Plans. So action plans relating to climate change are all captured alongside all other interventions within the PIAP. It's an implementation plan, and all resource allocation measures are linked within that plan. So whatever we do is within that plan, including these climate and environmental interventions are within there and are monitored from there. The SDGs, these global goals and various indicators have all been agreed upon and are within the plan and within the PIAPs. And to capture the data relating to all this is by a bureau which is also within the Ministry of Finance, which is the Bureau of Statistics, to monitor how well we are performing in terms of these SDGs. So in a nutshell, that's what it is in Uganda.
Well, I thank you for sharing Uganda's experience. And I hear very similar, context that was set before by Madam Hassan. I mean, I see the pieces of the puzzle. When you say PIAP, I can clearly see how the user proceeds can be tracked because you have a system to do it. When you talk about CFU, I clearly see that the intent really is to take the next step, to have the framework, which is of course international standards, whether you raise money, local currency or international, it's all about being ready. And I clearly see Uganda is taking massive steps to become ready so that they can access the capital market. And of course, we will keep engaging on that. I want to come to closer to where we are, to China. Let's learn from David. David, the CFA Institute has been a global leader in promoting ESG disclosure and responsible investment standards. We want to learn from you based on your experience in China's green pilot zones. How can such models empower subnational entities to attract and manage climate finance effectively?
Sure. So I think some of the lessons I'll mention here were also brought up by the examples from Uganda and Benin, just with some differences, because there's always going to be some local context differences. But one, I think, main advantage of the pilot zone structure in and of itself is that it gives you the ability to experiment without looking, at the national level, right? So you have these smaller areas where you can play around that don't necessarily impact the national level policy. So you can give more freedom to the actors to figure out what works.
Yeah.
And the example that I researched was Huzhou, which was the first of the pilot zones. And they started that process back in 2015. But one thing I learned from that pilot zone portion was really the enabling and policy environment is one of the most important parts, right? Because if you want to know why did they want to be a pilot zone, you have to go back 10 years before that and look at their industry structure and their changes to environmental regulation. They went from being a primary industry, right? They had mostly mining, textiles, and battery, right? But that led to issues with lead pollution, water pollution, which led to some public outcry, which led to the municipal government needing to manage these industries. So they went from, for example, having 200 plus battery manufacturers to 20, right? So that's a significant impact to their taxes. So they need to figure out how can we be more sustainable. And the way they saw that was through things like green finance. So how do you create an enabling green finance environment? First, you have to have environmental regulation. Then you can look into the policy environment around that. And we already heard a bit from the Benin example, like the need to have some top-down. So you had the national level coming with the mandate, but then you also had some bottom-up. So you had learnings from the municipal government, but having that communication channel to have the top-down mandate, but the bottom-up learning helps create that local context and local structure that says we have this local taxonomy. So they were the first in China to create like a green taxonomy. At the time, there were 3 national taxonomies, but they were the first to put together a local industry sector taxonomy. And theirs was accepted by the national government because they had that trust from the national government. But they did start kind of top down before going horizontal, right? So they started with capacity building in the municipal government, and then they worked that down, right? So they started it there, then they rolled it out to the banks, then the insurance companies, and then the SMEs. That way you had buy-in from each level and each piece of the ecosystem. So first is that capacity building process. Then the banks could create those internal divisions that focused on sustainable finance, but it also helped manage cost because the banks could then train the SMEs, right? So the bank hires a consultant, the consultant then trains the whole sector. So there's some cost management process there. The next was in centralization of systems. Right? So they got to experiment. I think they iterated 4 or 5 times over the years, but they built this, going from a manual process of Green Deal review to a digital process. And that digital process really reduces system friction. So they went from having, I think, a period of several weeks to several days to match a deal to a project. And it's also in a way bottom up in that the SMEs post their projects and then it matches them automatically to the banks. Right, so it removes that search time of who's the proper bank for this kind of project. It also centralized collection of carbon data and ESG data. So you could use the municipal government's data or build your own. Some of the banks would leverage the municipal data and then build their own additional, depending on what level they were at, like municipal versus rural versus national. So there were some lessons there in terms of the need for digital infrastructure for different parts of the system. And then the other part was incentives. They never really put in any mandates. Everything was done through market incentives. So there were some interesting structures they built around like ESG insurance, on creating like personal ESG scores at the rural level. You could do tasks around town that would then add up to getting a loan discount for individuals, right? So the rural banks could think of projects that they could do. They created their own individual carbon market there. And that gets into things like management of property rights and other aspects as well. So I think there's some lessons that we got from Benin and Uganda, and then some that are quite local to China in terms of how they manage their data and resources. But this is how they kind of did their industry transition without using transition finance, right? So it was done in a way that was able to leverage their initial kind of lack of capacity and then become more formalized and start dealing with things like just transition, et cetera, as they built up that local capacity.
Wow. Let me see if I understand this correctly. So we had the national taxonomy, and then China let provinces have their own taxonomy, and then provinces are raising funds on their own?
So at the time, there was no technical national taxonomy. You had 3 kind of separate agencies, each with their own. So like PBOC.
And they were not national?
They were national, but different portions looked at different things depending on who their stakeholders were. So there was certain, if you were in the PBOC, there was no coal. But if you were in another portion of the taxonomy, there was coal, right? So there was no national agreed upon what is a green activity.
Right.
So they were one of the first to create their own green activity, which then let them create their own green loan, green bond structures.
Right. Okay. Well, this is interesting. So set the high level taxonomies, if you like, and let the provinces to come up with their own taxonomies and give them a flexibility. That worked for China probably. Going back to Kabe, obviously, if we can look at, I think you've touched upon very important points, particularly on de-risking, technical assistance. That is definitely a must to help subnational or local entities. Could you give an example of how Kabe is really supporting local development or financial intermediaries in this area, particularly with your earlier intervention on those, those key elements, which are really needed to either kickstart the market or to scale further, right? So considering your role, if you could please share with us Kabe's experience. Over to you, Ms. Lee.
Sure. As I've mentioned about this, one of the examples that we've had, which is the ProMuni program, which is the financial intermediation program, but also we have a program called the Central American Dry Corridor Program, which has been financed with concessional finance as well as guarantee and grants to tackle the vulnerable communities in the several countries in Central America. So that was one of the examples of combined instruments of the loans, guarantees, as well as grants in one package of $266 million project. So that was co-financed with GCF and with in several different instruments. So that is one example. And as a sort of a pioneer of the development bank in Central America, as we finance more than 50% of the development finance in Central America, more so than the Inter-American Development Bank or the World Bank. We also try to scale up blended finance to reach the subnational entities. Not just, we understand the needs for the private capital to come in, so we don't stop at providing the private capital. So we try to scale up our blended finance schemes by blending sovereign and non-sovereign financing, by bringing in facilities from GCF as well as Adaptation Fund, and also our bilateral partners from Korea. We have Economic Development Cooperation Fund, EDCF, which is a subsidized loan from Korea, as well as KfW and European Union. So that way we can attract private investors to come in for high risk project, for a bankable project with lower perceived risk. So that's one thing that we're doing. But another thing that we're actually doing as well is issuing thematic bonds, like green bonds as well as blue bonds, and resilience bonds to attract institutional investors across the world. And that's been proven very successful with social bonds as well as sustainability bonds that are catered towards projects that are alongside the themes that we issue the bonds for. So that's one of that's two of the things that we are actually doing. But at the same time, the things that we're actually exploring is also an innovative financial mechanism, which is environmental credit markets, like a carbon credit, as well as which is not. We're just advancing, exploring this. So also this debt for climate swaps and debt for nature swaps, which is when the government isn't, or the the government can't repay the loans. We forgive that loan for having, with the condition that the government pays, commits to doing, projects in like environmental space. So that is something that we're exploring, that we have now, that not that we have done so, but that's something that we're exploring as one of the innovative tools. And yes.
I picked up the mic not to stop you, but no, thank you so much, Ms. Lee. I think this is exactly what the role that you said about blending. Really, what is the role that GCF's funding has to play? What is the role that the sovereign lending has to play, and how do we really blend it together to have a structure where private sector can really participate and open up sectors, or at least be involved in sectors which are hard to really enter in, right? So de-risking really is the key. And the way you mentioned about this, as soon as you said an innovative mechanism, I really got really interested on the innovative mechanism, but more to explore there. So I'm not going to get deeper into that question now, but of course, debt swaps and the roles of MDBs is a great way to open up a big climate market, and we're really looking at how we can engage on that, and how can MDBs really take up some of those assets and see how climate can climate projects can get benefit of those swaps. I would like to move back to Benin for a bit. I think 2021 SDG bond, $500 million is an excellent success story. And the way you've explained about the whole tracking mechanism and to really making sure that the user proceeds are tracked to the last mile, not only the allocation reporting all the way up to impact reporting and so on and so forth. What, according to you, Madam Hassan, have been so how is Benin really planning to build on this success, the success that you mentioned before? And perhaps, is there any other, you did mention green bonds, but is there anything else that you're doing to get ready for the green bonds or other thematic bonds that you mentioned before?
Thank you for this question. I think that I will answer to the question, but also give a bit of opening of what. When we say yes, I mean it was I will say that an inaugural and the one of its kind in sub-Saharan Africa. I mean, Benin was the first country in Africa to issue a green bond. So it was a success, and we build on it. We build on that success. But what I want to say is that by building on that success, we have created the credibility of Benin on the market. But now the challenge for us, because we are mentioning debt for nature swap, we are mentioning blue bond, and most of the time when you are looking at that mechanism, blue bond is come also with a conservation fund, and you have a minimum of economics that you have to make when you are swapping. And for a country like Benin, my country, where you are, I would say that you have a good debt profile. You are managing well your debt. You have, I will say, a credit rating, a good credit rating. So passing to a debt for nature swap sometimes is not economically viable. And yes, so my question would be, if we have, and we have that, yes, we have the green bond framework. We are also working on our national transition in taxonomy, addressing the private sector, because we need also them to now come in and step in with all what we have built since 10 years. But now the question is really, how are we making sure that a country like Benin that has is building on the SMEs ecosystem, private sector, how are we fast-tracking or how are we enhancing our credit worthiness to be able to mobilize capital but at a lower cost? I think that this is something that we are trying to work on, and you mentioned some of one of the area or the avenue to explore, carbon markets. So we are building that credibility. I mentioned earlier the National Carbon Registration Authority. We also have this role of finding new mechanism, blending, to to work on that credibility, to work on that green bond, SDG bond that we issue in 2021, to be able to have, I will not say cheap money, but it's more like money that reflect our creditworthiness. Today, Benin is BB with S&P rating. We moved to a BB in April this year, but still, it's when you go out and then when you want to mobilize capital, you have, like, I will say that, a ceiling that you cannot. So how are we moving from that? I would say that ecosystem that Benin is doing well everywhere. How are we enhancing the credit of Benin to be able to mobilize capital that will go directly to our SMEs, to our economical actors, and because the impact will come from those SMEs. And if we cannot mobilize more capital but at a lower cost, it will be difficult to scale. So to come back, I wanted to open that. Maybe we can continue. It's food for thought. So to come back to the SDG bond, yes, it has been a success. Yes, we capitalize on it. We were able to mobilize that 500 million in 2021, 350 million in 2023 with AFDB. And also, it allowed us, because we were used to that, to mobilize capital that were not directly linked to an SDG or, a thematic, but we went to the US denominated market in January 2024, 750 million USD, recently this year as well. And we will build on that. That green bond framework, hopefully, we will be able to issue a bond or a loan, or to have a loan in the coming months. So yes, we are capitalizing on it, and the impact is huge on our population. We were able to change the life of several people millions of people in our country. Electricity access, school meals, women at school. Girls at school. So yes, it has an impact. And Benin, really, if I can say, it's really in our DNA now. Our policy is sustainability. We are building our financial schemes, our financial solution, and even our budget, our planning, all the way to sustainability. So it's not a matter of just where the money is coming from, so we will, like a name dropping, we will take it. No, it's really in our DNA to say that we need to build a sustainable economy, we need to build a sustainable way of mobilizing capital, even developing our project, to make sure that in 10, in 15 years, anyone who will be there will be able to build on it and to attract more funds.
In our DNA, that is what we would love to hear from literally every stakeholder that comes on board. Thank you so much. I think track record, I think in probably all the interventions, there's one commonality that I'm picking up, is just building a track record, right? In not just one system or one issuance, but it's really about how do we keep building on our credibility and increase our credit rating therefore, and that's when markets would look at countries, and MDBs would look at investing, so on and so forth. You also mentioned, and I could only capture the short form, it is National Carbon Registry Authority. I think this sounds like a great initiative also, because if you can measure carbon to that level, carbon markets opening up as well, right? So that also looks like a forward-looking initiative, and I congratulate you for having that system in place and becoming really ready again on what is coming. Again, not just debt ceiling is something that we talk a lot about to all of our governments, and something probably we can discuss with you, Madam Hassan, on how that debt ceiling can be either increased or you can have a little more headroom to do more. And that's something that we support our member countries. Maybe we could have a discussion on that after this session. I want to come back to Ms. Lee. Ms. Lee, CABE has been extremely relevant for the economic success, particularly for the countries that you operate in. And CABE is large, in terms of the lending volume, but what products or partnerships are you exploring to unlock additional private sector investments in the region?
Thank you. We understand that we cannot do everything alone in this sector, so we're closely we're now part of this working group of the International Development Finance Club, and we're also, as mentioned, we're an accredited entity of the GCF. We're also, we work closely with Adaptation Fund. In addition to that, we recently signed a statement of intent to promote sustainable investment with UN Capital Development Fund, and also joined Finance in Common Summit Network to promote blue economy. Those are the key partners that we work with, but otherwise we have local partners that we work with on the ground in Central America.
Did you touch upon the products? Sorry, did you touch upon the products? Probably the new products that you're looking at as well? You spoke a bit about the partnerships that I captured.
Yes.
Sorry, just checking if you have any products to share that CABE is looking to roll out. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about the innovative product that you have in mind.
Which I've touched upon earlier about,
Okay.
what we're exploring. So
Fair enough.
if that wasn't,
No, that's no, well captured. Thank you so much, Ms. Lee. Sorry to put you a little bit on the spot there. Looking at Hong Kong or China's experience, so Hong Kong really plays a unique role in linking global investors and mainland markets. From the CFA Institute's perspective, and based on your experience in Hong Kong, David, what skills or market mechanisms do you believe are critical to scale sustainable finance solutions at the subnational level? Skills and market mechanisms.
It's an easy question, right? So I think to break that into two parts, right? So I think when it comes to skills, like there's a lot that goes into the need for filing like proper sustainable disclosures, right? Knowing that. And we've done a lot of work in Hong Kong helping to create some of these skill set taxonomies. So, if you look, we have an enhanced competency framework that's been put out recently for the Hong Kong Monetary Authority. That says if you're working in sustainable finance, these are the skills you should have based on your role. So different roles will need different skills. But in general, I would say like enhanced disclosure is one, climate scenario analysis, especially around the need for adaptation, especially at the subnational level. There's the sovereign level look, but when you look at like kind of how kind of non-standardized climate impacts are, how do they affect, a city in China is different than how it affects China as a whole. So how do you do these analyses? How do you value them properly? How do you communicate them? I think especially stewardship and engagement will become much more important. So that's kind of, I think, some of the basics on the skill sets. In terms of the markets, we've started to create Carbon Connect to have the Hong Kong local carbon market, but that is, I think, aimed at enhancing international participation. Hong Kong has its climate framework and its climate plans that look to make it kind of a hub for transition finance in the area. So that the goal of that is to connect Asia and China with the world. So having that kind of standardized frameworks. But I think also we've talked a lot about standardized frameworks and global frameworks, but how to turn them into the local context versions is very important because they're mostly developed for developed markets and for large companies. But when we come to this area, you're dealing with emerging markets, with SMEs or micro enterprises who are at very different levels of development or economic standing. And those universal solutions don't necessarily work. Well, that's probably the nice way of saying it, but they're not going to work in these places. So being able to work with them, but create something different that fits your local area, that way you can have that feedback with lower friction is a necessary kind of skill that needs to be developed.
Okay, this is interesting. I noted Hong Kong is at least aspiring to become a hub for transition finance. That's encouraging because transition finance really is a must and for the region. Looking at a number of ASEAN member countries and others who are really making that efforts towards transition, particularly in the VIP countries, Vietnam, Indonesia, and Philippines. A lot has been discussed there. So we probably have a discussion on this on how this transition finance hub at Hong Kong could work. I wanted to ask Minister Lugulubi, Uganda has maintained a steady rise in the Green Growth Index for the last few decades, supported by policies that encourage a resilient and inclusive economy. Could you please highlight one or two innovative financing mechanisms Uganda has deployed to attract green investments, and what outcomes have emerged so far through the innovative mechanisms?
Thank you so much. Innovative financing is coming to Uganda first, largely because we are running a free account that allows the free inflow and outflow of resources. And this has, relaxed the movement of capital from various countries and from various investors to engage into innovative financing for various projects. So that flexibility, freedom alone allowing free inflow and outflow of resources. You don't have to be worried, when your resources are coming in. But also, other innovative mechanisms have included in the budget, in the national budget, we have a law that makes a provision for 2.5% of the budget to be directed towards contingency funding. And that contingency funding is ring-fenced for disasters. As a country specifically, we have ring-fenced such resources. And these resources have also been used. I will give a simple example. We have a number of people who had settled on Mountain Elgon and who suffered from huge disasters like landslides. These people are being resettled using those same resources. So those resources are available annually to handle climate-related disasters, and even before disasters actually happen, these resources could be used. Thirdly, we have established a national financing vehicle framework for blending resources, for climate financing, private and public resources. This is a new initiative, but we have already attracted funds into this national financing vehicle as one of those frameworks. Of course, we are opening engagements into capital market trade. We have launched our regulations, regulations 2025. They are very recent, and we hope those are going to help us to govern carbon markets and the finalizing modeling of fees, taxation, and proceed sharing and our fiscal framework for capital markets trade. In the green bonds, this is we are not yet there like Benin is, but we are getting there because we have been mobilizing resources largely through our sovereign bonds, infrastructure bonds, and things like that. And these resources that we mobilize through the sovereign bonds are the ones that we have been using to support climate-related issues. So many other interventions, and I should mention here that the establishment of a climate financing unit was a game changer, because now this is helping us to put together the necessary capacities and to strengthen that capacity to mobilize resources. Right now, we engage with the GGI, for example, the GCF, and other institutions. Today, we wouldn't be talking about capacity for green bonds, which we have now built, and very soon we should be beginning to issue bonds if we did not have the climate financing unit. So we have an entity with staff whose capacity have now been built. We have built the necessary competences. And I think this is a big lesson for many African countries to copy from. You have assembled these capacities in order to be able to attract resources. Now we can reach the EU, UK, all these multilateral donors like the IMF, World Bank, with all those resources now available with them. We can access those resources to support our various interventions. But the issue of rating, my sister here was talking about credit rating. It remains a big problem for most of us in Africa. Quite maliciously, we have been poorly rated. And this creates problems for us to issue debt instruments like these green bonds. Because if you are poorly rated, then you cannot attract good capital for yourself. You know, and we do not think that we are fairly rated, and that's why we have gone ahead to create an Africa Credit Rating Agency, so that with better ratings, we are able to attract capital from different sources. We are able to issue these green bonds and many other types of bonds. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Minister. I think, green taxonomy in place with the climate finance unit. You mentioned about free flow of funds, cash inflow and cash outflow, but you also then emphasized on ring fencing and really creating the systems for the landslide affected people who were living on the hill. I think, and then you mentioned about PIAP. Please don't ask me the full form of that now, but probably, but you did mention about a system where all the projects really can be tagged and the fund flows can be managed. I think what you're telling is really the preparedness of taking the next step, which is to really access the capital markets. I agree with you. In the beginning, it's all about building the track record, and probably guarantee mechanisms will come into play, and those structures would still are available, and there are experiences that we can learn from. Pharaoh, I can go on with this session for 2 more hours with this lovely panel that you've given me, but I think in the interest of time, and I don't think there are going to be more questions that we have time for. I want to thank my panel and all the participants, all the people attending. Thank you. Probably a round of applause for all of us.
Thanks, Gulshan. I could see you were having fun. I didn't want to stop you. We have a presentation next for a few minutes, which I'm not sure how to start. We have a presentation. Yes, okay. I think help is coming. Very well. So it's going to be a brief presentation just before we get into the following panel on climate resilient infrastructure. We're going to look at 3 things in this presentation. We're going to look at nature and climate related financial risks. We get a look into the architecture of green, the financial sector today, and then finally look at trends in sustainable and biodiversity finance. So why starting with nature and climate-related financial risks, right? Often it feels like we expect the financial sector to do something that is not really meant to do. Yeah, the financial sector excels at identifying, quantifying, and monetizing and remunerating risks. So risk really needs to be at the center of the conversation about the climate agenda. Often we get lost in discussion about green instruments, on green bonds like we've heard, on swaps and green credit lines. But really what we want to see is not a sector that is dominated by an endless list of different names for green, social, sustainability, rainbow instruments, right? What we want to achieve is a sector that is able to integrate and adopt and price nature and climate-related financial risks. So then, ideally, right, a project, a company that is more sustainable than another will be able to secure interest rates that are more favorable than one that is less sustainable, right? Because we would be less exposed to transition and physical risks related with nature and finance. So what the World Economic Forum shows us annually, right, based on a survey of public and private sector leaders and decision makers, is that nature-related and climate-related risks are now being identified and recognized as the risks with the highest likelihood of impacts and also the highest magnitude of impact, right? A very dangerous combination. And I think we've already heard during the first panel, right, risk being a recurring topic of discussion, and even more so in the next and the following 2 panels. So now let's take a look at the current status of the green financial architecture. We see a number of jurisdictions and countries and regions that are developing and adopting taxonomies today globally. We have approximately, it seems, over 40 taxonomies and frameworks today that tell us what is greens and set different thresholds and definitions on what is green, what is social, and what is sustainable. Here we see a map from CCAP, which I think is a very good example on how you should not build a map, right? It's pretty confusing in terms of colors and how they've tried to indicate what is what, but really the message that we want to take away here is that 40 plus taxonomies and frameworks already exist, which in a way takes away the value of the taxonomy, right? If the purpose of the taxonomy is to tell us what is green, why do we need you to tell it with 40 different frameworks and 40 different taxonomies? We see an evolution in the collective quantified goal on climate finance, right? We moved from an initial target of mobilization of $100 billion annually. The conversation has moved to now $300 billion per year. And in the Baku to Belém roadmap, right, that was put together last year and is still being finalized, this target is now ballooning to $1.3 billion per year that need to be mobilized under this target. What is also interesting, and the representative from CABEI mentioned it, is the role the multilateral development banks are increasingly playing, and they want to play in the fight against climate change. Right? The funding from MDBs has increased significantly. I can't really see the numbers from here, but if I remember correctly, it's about $140 billion from MDBs that have been mobilized towards the climate agenda. But it also, what is possibly more interesting is that we start seeing clauses in their funding agreements that allow for their credit lines and debt repayment to be paused when the debtor country is affected by climate shocks and climate-induced events, right? So creating more flexibility, more fiscal space for countries that are facing extreme climate-induced events, as well as a growing role that MDBs are playing in debt restructuring processes. We see a growing number of task force, working groups, expert groups, led and composed by MDBs that want to play a bigger role in bilateral and commercial debt conversion processes. Again, very far from the slide here. This is not the ideal setting. But this year in Spain, we had what is called the FFD4 event, Finance for Development Forum, where decision makers and leaders from the public and private sector gathered together to try to restructure the global financial architectures. So what were the takeaways? The takeaways were about moving towards a more fair fiscal structure. It was about prioritizing private investments. For the first time, maybe not exactly the first time, but more than ever, we really saw at FFD4 the key and central role of subnational actors with cities, municipalities, states, national development banks, and quasi-sovereigns really leading the agenda. What is interesting, worrying, scary, depending on how you see things, is really what this slide is showing us here. This slide is telling us that today, more than 60% or almost 60% of developing countries are facing a situation of debt distress or high likelihood of debt distress. This is twice what it was 10 years ago. Yeah? So almost 60% of developing countries globally are in a situation of debt distress or high risk of debt distress. And this is particularly worrying not only from a debt sustainability point of view, but also from the perspective of what we were saying earlier about climate and nature-related financial risks. Because there is increasing evidence that there is a positive correlation between vulnerability, climate vulnerability, and debt distress. Yeah? The higher your exposure to climate and nature-related financial risks, the higher your exposure to financial and fiscal risks. So this graphic is certainly worried in that sense. What is positive, we see financial regulators that are increasingly playing a central role in promoting, in enforcing, and monitoring the work of the financial sectors and financial actors with regards to monitoring and disclosure of nature and climate-related financial risks. Because this is what is really lacking today. It's not even about being able to mitigate those risks or develop the instruments to mitigate those risks. Today, the reality is that we lack the data to build model, we lack the data from financial sector actors to build insurance mechanisms. So what we see here is the Financial Sustainability Board. These are financial regulators from 25 jurisdictions globally that have come together to set up a roadmap that sees financial regulators playing an increasingly central role in mandating the quantification, monitoring and disclosure of nature and climate-related financial risks from financial sector actors. Now, we go into the trends in sustainable finance and biodiversity finance. Last year, according to the Climate Policy Initiative, globally, $1.9 trillion were mobilized towards the climate agenda. What is interesting is to see the pace of finance mobilization, how it has changed. So between 2021 and 2018 and 2020, the compounded annual growth rate of climate finance mobilization was about 8%, whereas in the past 5 years, that has increased to a compounded annual growth rate of 26% between 2021 and 2023. So things are moving faster. And what is interesting and relevant is to see that for the first time last year, the private sector contributed more than the public sector in the fight against climate change, in the financing of the climate agenda. Private sectors now are the largest contributor of climate finance. I hope you can see better than I, but what this slide tells us here is that 90% of climate finance that was mobilized last year, 90% of it has gone to mitigation activities. Less than 5%, in fact, less than 4% has gone to adaptation. What is interesting is also to see the sources of this financing. In orange, we have private sector, and if you cannot read what the orange lines are telling us is that commercial banks and households are today the largest providers of climate finance. And in blue, we have the public sector. And there is a very little line there that we almost cannot see that refers to international climate funds, which is about 3 billion out of that $1.9 trillion, right? So I think that poses an interesting question, right? It's often when we have this type of gatherings, we focus a lot of the discussion on international climate funds, on these funding proposals that we always talk about and monopolize our conversation and often ruin our days, right? But really, who is mobilizing the financing are commercial financial institutions, our households, our enterprises, our national development banks, right? Those are the main drivers of climate finance today. Now, if we were able to maintain the current pace of climate finance mobilization, right, this slide tells us that by 2028 we should be able to reach the minimum goal that we had set for ourselves, right? I think personally that this slide is extremely misleading, right? It tells us that by 2028 we should be in a situation where we are almost there. But really, when we look at the numbers behind it, who is mobilizing this $1.9 trillion towards climate finance? China accounts for $600 billion out of the $1.9 trillion. The European Union, Western Europe, accounts for $550 billion, right? So the great majority of this financing is being mobilized from and to countries that are not as vulnerable, right, as the majority of developing countries globally. So this slide and this assessment is useful from a volume perspective, but really has very strong limitation. What is interesting to see is really how, beside where we are mobilizing it from and to, is how we are mobilizing this financing. 60% of this climate finance is mobilized through debt instruments, right? Who is really financing climate change today? The climate action agenda today are fixed income instruments, yeah? Our bonds, our sovereign loans, our loans in general. Yeah? Fixed income instruments are the main driver of climate finance flows today. 60% of climate finance flows are debt funded. Yeah? And as a result of that, we see literally an explosion in sustainable debt instruments since 2015. And 40% of outstanding sustainable debt has been issued in the past 3 years. Yeah, I'm going to say that again. 40% of outstanding sustainable debt has been issued in the past 3 years. Since 2015, we have seen over 800 sovereign sustainability or thematic bond issuances. Yeah. So this situation is, again, when we look at the number, $1.9 trillion mobilized, we are almost there. Yeah, we almost could feel positive about it. But really, how are we mobilizing it? Towards which countries? From which countries? And this brings us to another very important point, and that we touched upon earlier, the positive correlation that exists between fiscal risks and climate and nature-related financial risks. The higher your exposure to fiscal risks, the higher your exposure to nature and climate-related risks. And so once again, we see the conversation, we see acceleration on debt restructuring processes, right? Debt for nature swaps, debt conversions, however you want to call them, right? What these slides shows us, these circles, are the magnitude of debt restructuring processes that have taken place. In pink, what you see there, so in red, which you almost cannot see here, in red and blue, are mostly bilateral debt for nature swaps or bilateral swaps that took place in the 70s, in the 80s, and the 90s. What you see in pink and orange are commercial debt swaps that happened during the past 2 decades. So these are becoming more frequent, are becoming much larger, yeah, because much of the agenda today is funded through debt instruments. So here we see the example of the Galapagos debt for nature swaps. We'll hear later today from the Vice Minister of Economy from Ecuador, which is a country that has structured during the past 3 years 2 debt for nature swaps conversions, right? In the first one of these, the Galapagos debt for nature swaps, Ecuador was able to restructure almost $2 billion of outstanding debt. And as a result of that, they were able to reduce debt service payment by over $1 billion, right? With almost more than 400 million of which going into the conservation of the Galapagos Natural Park. Now again, positive correlation between fiscal risks and nature and climate related financial risks, which is scary on its own, is also scarier when you see to what extent are we really able to ensure these risks and these losses, right? We were saying earlier, if we don't monitor, if we don't disclose, right, we are unable to quantify, to internalize, to monetize these risks. Today, or since 2000, only 18% of climate-induced disasters and losses were insured. Only 18% of those. And this tells us a little bit about the importance of the role of financial regulators and supervisory bodies to enforce, to require financial institutions to collect, monitor, quantify, and disclose these risks, right? We need to increase data availability in order to enhance our ability to insure, to price, and to remunerate these risks. This slide is very interesting. It shows us on the left in 2021, these green, yellow, and red lines tells us to what extent commercial financial institutions in Europe were adopting practices related with the management of climate-related risks. So what you see on the left, 2021, I don't remember exactly the numbers. I have to see them. So we had less than 30% of commercial banks in 2021 that considered themselves to be exposed to climate-related financial risks. Less than 5% of banks in Europe were adopting international best practices related with the management of these risks. What happens in 2021? The European Commission passes the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, SFDR, which requires financial institutions to start reporting on nature and climate-related financial risks. And suddenly the situation changes. They start identifying, quantifying, understanding their exposure, and we pass to a situation where we had less than 30% of the banks acknowledging their exposure to climate risks, to 95% of the banks considering themselves to be highly exposed to climate risks. We have today almost 60% of banks integrating international best practices related with the management of nature and climate risks. So again, the important role of regulators to incentivize the financial sector to take this first step. Back in 2021, this is a survey that the European Central Banks run annually. Back in 2021, the main driver reported by commercial banks as being the main driver for adoption of nature and climate related metrics was regulation. Today is not anymore regulation, is exposure to risks. Right? The regulation served the purpose of enhancing their understanding about exposure to risks. As a result of that, they are now independently implementing practices. Because as we were saying at the very beginning of this presentation, that is what the financial sector excels at, right? Quantifying, monetizing, and remunerating risks. So here, just to conclude again, the key role of financial sector regulators, superintendencies of banks, capital markets, ministries of finance, to move from awareness raising, from capacity building, to really mandating and enforcing the quantification, the disclosure, right, the measurement of climate and nature-related financial risks. And from here, the importance of the work that is being done from IFRS, from TNFD, and many others. I'm going to close in here, and we now go to the second panel, which is moderated by Catalina Garcia, Investment Officer for the Regional Office in Asia. Please, a round of applause for Catalina. In this panel, we're going to look into, I'm going to steal your thunder, Kata, but then I'll give you the word. In this panel, we're going to look into how can we embed nature-positive standards and climate resilience into infrastructure assets globally. Infrastructure is a main driver, one of the main drivers of economic development, is one of the main drivers of social development, access to essential services. Infrastructures, by definition, they have a useful and technical lives that spans 50 or even 100 of years. That means that the infrastructure that we are building today is going to lock in countries into certain pathway of development trajectories, right? So what we want to make sure today is that we climate-proof these infrastructure assets, that we integrate nature-positive and climate resilience considerations into the design, the management, and the financing of infrastructure assets globally. Kata, over to you.
It's okay now. Okay. Thank you everyone for being here. I will call now the panel members to the stage. So first we have Dr. James Lewis Fletcher, Climate Envoy Caribbean Community. Please join us. Yes. Now we have Ms. Aisha Al-Bodoli, the Director, Green Development and Environmental Affairs Department from the Ministry of Climate Change and Environment. Hello, we didn't say hello. We did. Next, we have Mr. Hiroshi Wago, Global Partnerships Director from Latin America and the Caribbean Development Bank, CAF. And we have finally the Dr. Jen Leon, Executive Director from the Development Bank for Resilient Prosperity. Well, maybe he's not joining today. Okay, sorry, I didn't see you. Well, I know all of you are been there for so long, so we will try to do this fun and interesting. We will have 3 or 4 sections to this panel, depending on the time. And we will start saying that if infrastructure sits at the intersection of climate, nature, and development. Each of your organizations and institutions plays a different role in translating that ambition into practice. So I want to start by asking all of you how, from your organization perspective, you play the role in addressing the nature-positive, climate-resilient infrastructure investment gap. So maybe let's start here to my...
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I guess I'll approach it a little bit differently, not the role that I have played, but the role that we intend to play as CARICOM Climate Envoy and the new paradigm that we're trying to usher in the Caribbean. As you know, we've just had, again, direct evidence of why it is that we need to change the way in which we do things, with Hurricane Melissa going through the Caribbean, devastating Jamaica, passing through Cuba, has caused massive flooding in Haiti and is now on its way to the Bahamas. So it's making its Caribbean tour in the north of the Caribbean. So clearly we have to do things differently. So the role that I think we need to play is, first of all, we have to set standards and send different signals. We have to work to convince utilities and public agencies that they need to stop treating resilience and nature as things that are nice to have, and to start treating them as basic requirements. So that means, and we'll go into that, I guess, a little bit more detail later on, but that means writing into public procurement that any clinic, any school, any power substation, any water plant must be able to survive a Category 4 or a Category 5 hurricane. And it has also to be able to restart operations quickly. It means recognizing the financial value of things like healthy mangroves, reefs, and wetlands that are natural defenses to these monster storms, instead of treating them as free and disposable. Secondly, we have to build real project pipelines, not just ideas. So we have to stop sending projects to banks and hoping someone will fund them, projects that we have not done proper feasibility work, solid engineering and siting, building codes that reflect new climate realities. We're behaving as if we're still operating in the 80s when these storms that we're seeing now were 1 in 100-year events. They're not. They're 1 in 10-year events, 1 in 5-year events. So we really have to have different designs of our projects. And I think finally, we have to demand that the finance that we get fits our small islands. So we need finance structures where concessional funding, that is funding on easier terms, insurance-style guarantees and resilience benefits are layered together. We heard from the last presentation that a lot of the funding that is available to small island developing states and least developed countries is in the form of loans. You can't ask a country that is already carrying a very heavy debt profile because it has had to borrow to repair and recover after many extreme weather events to now have to borrow more money to deal with a crisis that it did not cause. I use this analogy during Climate Week in New York. It's the equivalent of somebody taking a baseball bat and breaking your 2 knees and then saying to you that the money that you need for the surgery to repair your knees, for the caster to immobilize your legs whilst you heal, and for the crutches to help you move around, you have to borrow that money from the same person who broke your legs. That is what we're being asked to do when we're told that we have to borrow money to fund resilience. That does not make sense. So really the finance that is available, that is made available to these countries has to be finance that recognizes their situation and is a lot more sympathetic. We cannot fund resilience with loans, and particularly not loans that are non-concessional.
Thank you so much. Now, Ms. Aida, how is in your country? Can you explain us a bit, please?
A very good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for hosting us today in this important session. And I'm glad to be here with you and the other panelists to share our views about this important subject. So we know that all development and infrastructural investment must be guided by nature and by climate resilience. So our focus on sustainable development, and let me give you a practical example from our country where we have launched a program that's called Istidama. So Istidama in Arabic means sustainability in English, and that program focused on actually ensuring that sustainability is already embedded in all of our infrastructural guidelines and infrastructural and in the built environment itself. So it's an example of how we are providing actually a foundation for nature-based and nature-positive development that uploads our traditions and help us moving toward our climate ambitions. As you may be aware that in 2023, we had committed to contribute $30 billion to the Altera Climate Fund. And that crucial fund is very important for providing access to funding to the developing countries, actually to focus on industrial decarbonization, on energy transition, and also on climate technology. So this is particularly relevant when we are talking about infrastructure, because it provides the means to focus on climate resilience and nature positive development.
Thank you so much for your answer. Now, Mr. Hiroshi, can you tell us about what CAF is doing right now?
Okay. Thank you so much for the invitation. First of all, congratulations to GGGI for this amazing week, and thank you, Ferruccio, and all the team to having CAF here. I just want to answer the question, giving back to the history of CAF. When CAF was founded in 1970 by 600 countries, at that time the core of the bank was infrastructure. And during many years, a big part of our portfolio was infrastructure. Now, with the evolution of the bank, now we have 24 member countries. We're covering almost all Latin America, from Mexico to Argentina. And in 2021, we have a capital increase of $7 billion. That is the largest capital increase that we have been in our history, with three main commitments to our board members. The first commitment was to have at least 40% of the green operations by the bank by 2026. The good news about that is that last year we accomplished that first target. We're around 41% of our operations with green components, and this is something that is guiding the strategy of the bank nowadays. The second main commitment of the capital increase was to increase our finance investing in the subnational governments, working more with cities, municipalities, and provinces. And this is something that we see like a main actor for the resilient infrastructure. And the third one is to increase our capacity towards the private sector. Now we're trying to double the participation of the private sector in our portfolio. Within this strategy that we're completing the first stage, we're trying to make it more greener our portfolio. We're working with all the different divisions of the bank to make greener components in the operations. Now we calculate that 2/3 of our operations have green, or they have very clear green components in the operation. And the second one is to work close to the governments to have the approvals in a greener way that we can do. Now we are facing the second stage, and we are facing the targets to 2030. And basically, we want to have 10% of our annual financing focused in biodiversity. That would be a very important role. The second one is $15 billion by 2030 in climate adaptation and disaster risk management, and $4 billion for water security, and finally $2.5 billion in the blue economy. We accomplished already $1.2 billion in blue economy, and in this conference we double our target. And finally, we are targeting around $8.5 billion by 2030 in regenerative and resilient agriculture. We launched our agricultural strategy last March in Santiago de Chile, and part of this strategy is to see the connection between green operations and the agricultural projects that we have in Latin America. And finally, Ferruccio was explaining the big disparity between mitigation and adaptation. We're trying to make more focus in adaptation projects, and it's something that we want to rebalance in the mix of projects that we have nowadays.
Thank you so much. We will go back to these points later. So now, Dr. Jean, can you give us your answer, please?
Thank you very much, and thanks for having us here. I think we start this by recognizing we are today where we are because of what we've been doing. And therefore, if we want to make a change, we need to reimagine all the things that we have been doing. And so our starting point is we need to finance infrastructure, not as a silo as we do today, but as a system. And returns cannot be returns measured on short-term GDP. They have to be returns measured in durable, inclusive prosperity. So that widens the perspective. Why do we do that? We say we adopt a systems approach, and that systems approach delivers resilient prosperity. That's the durable, inclusive prosperity that we talk about. And we do this by optimizing not productive capital, which is our GDP, but productive capital plus natural capital plus human and societal capital. And we do that all within keeping the planet stable, meaning operating within the 9 planetary boundaries that we have. If not, we repeat exactly where we are. And so the central thesis coming out of that for us is capital will flow sustainably whenever we price risk appropriately. And we have outcomes that are verifiable. And so to be able to do that, I think we have 3 things we need to do. We need to embed nature as a value driver in the entire infrastructure deal, from appraisal through credit assessment, through performance monitoring, all the way through refinancing. And that means 3 things for us. We need appropriate measurement. Measurement in the sense of being able to implement beyond GDP wealth accounting that takes nature-adjusted return in markets. Second, we need appropriate incentives where we reward resilience, we reward nature performance, we introduce insurance or asset protection, and we monetize, tokenize cash flows from ecosystem services. And lastly, we need to embrace a different type of partnerships that promote capacity across regional platforms of governments, multilateral development banks, local institutions, building skills, generating data, and supporting project delivery.
Thank you so much. I will highlight the need for a new paradigm and how the sustainable standards are the first step, but we need to pass from policy to action. So actually that is the second part of this panel, how we pass from the policy to the action in each of the countries and cases. So I want to ask Ms. Aisha, given the commitment that your country has and being a regional hub for green finance and innovation, can you highlight relevant policies or mechanisms that have effectively mobilized private capital for a positive infrastructure?
Yeah, that's really a very important point to be highlighted in here, because we are moving now from planning stage to a practical and application stage. In UAE, we had adopted, and I can share with you like a few examples of the policies that we adopted and the mechanism. So let me highlight 3 mechanisms in this regard. The first one was actually the sustainable finance framework that we had adopted and introduced to guide the stakeholders towards the mobilization of a private capital for sustainable and green investment. And that was really important to promote sustainability in financial decision making. In UAE, we are creating policies to deliver the financing required to make climate action an attractive investment opportunity. And in this regard, the second example that I want to highlight in my discussion and in my intervention today is related to the power purchase agreement. That was also a very important mechanism and tool that we utilized to have a competitive market. Positioning United Arab Emirates as an attractive destination and an attractive hub for foreign direct investment had really reduced our reliances on public investment. And we have seen also another mechanism that was really practical and efficient in our country, especially for the mega and the large projects to bring them to life, was actually the public-private partnerships mechanism. Through the public-private partnership, we had really managed to bring large-scale projects to life and also to optimize the cost, efficiencies, and risk management. So these are three mechanisms and policies that we adopted in UAE: the framework of sustainable finance, the public-private partnership, and the power purchase agreement.
Thank you so much for your answer and explaining how public and private can work together for the same objective. Now, I will ask to Dr. Jean Leon, how can we reshape incentives and partnerships so capital flows towards resilient infrastructure at scale, especially in risk-adverse systems?
I think we can recognize the following. When measurement incentives, risk sharing are aligned, capital will move from being risk averse to risk aware. And so what that implicitly says is, if we pay for verified resilience, markets will supply it. So the trick really is, how do you promote verified resilience? And I think there are three ways to unlock that. The first is financial incentives have to be tied to verified adaptation and ecosystem outcomes. Now what that does is it aligns fiduciary duty with long-term stability. The second is you have to make shocks financeable. The issue with shocks is you need to have a wider class of state contingent instruments, or at least instruments with state contingent features, whether they be automatic pauses or premiums that are triggered by parametric indices, so that the projects that you finance survive the events that justify their existence. Not like what Jimmy was explaining, where you break the guy's leg and say, you have to still pay for the cask. No, we need to find ways of avoiding and preventing that, and that is through state contingent features. And the third is, we need not projects, but we need to orchestrate partnerships. And what that translates to is we need partnerships for people and planet, where we combine policy anchors to reduce policy uncertainty with de-risking tools that actually reduce the need for high premiums and high cost of capital. And the third is to undertake what we are calling integrated or pooled investment projects, whereby you are not doing one project that is likely to fail, but you are undertaking a chain, a pool of projects that coincide with the concept of a chain. And therefore, the chain has a lower risk of failing, a higher return profile, lower cost of capital by way of premium, and therefore you engineer the attractiveness to private sector in terms of doing those particular development projects.
Thank you so much for your answer. And I want to join that to the next question that will go to Mr. Hiroshi. And CAF has evolved from an infrastructure development bank into a champion of natural, positive, and resilient development. So I want to ask you how CAF is embedding resilience and natural consideration into the infrastructure finance system.
Thank you for the question. First, I want to share that we strongly believe that there would not be development without a climate and natural resilience. And we feel that roads, ports, and cities that ignore climate risk, they will end up costing much more, they will be failing sooner, and they will harm the communities that they're supposed to serve. Then this is something that we need to analyze for each project and to bring the conditions to have that. For that reason, we are ensuring that our shareholder countries integrate disaster risk management and climate change adaptation in their infrastructure investments. Then we're trying to change trying to cooperate between our experience in infrastructure and as well our new technical teams in climate change to try to have the most strong and better practices in that. First, CAF has explicitly incorporated resilience principle into the green finance framework that we have in the bank. And as well, we have some examples, for example, the United Nations Disaster Risk Reductions principles of resilient structure are cross-cutting away all the projects that were financing in the region. As well, we have different new tools that we are deploying. For example, one is the eligible activities guide that we have for the new Green Finance Attribution Guide, the emissions calculator, and as well several sector green finance guides and the establishment of tax fork in green financing to monitoring and see the different projects and the accomplishment of that. Finally, we see very important cooperation in the mobilization of resources. The bank has been mobilizing around 8 billion in the last 3 years, and this is something that most of the resources are going to these kind of projects. We see that each dollar that we are putting in the table mobilize several more from co-financing partnerships, national development banks that we talked in the last panels, and as well private investors. This is something that we see that many of the private investors are following the same guidelines, and it's something that we can cooperate and work better in that field.
Thank you so much. So all of you mentioned how to pass from policy to practice, and now let's check how to finance natural positive infrastructure. So I want to ask Dr. Fletcher, how should feasibility and environmental and social processes should be updated so natural-based solutions are our preferred option?
Well, I think, again, using the example that we just had of Hurricane Melissa, it showed us that concrete walls alone will not save us. That we had storm surge that was overtopping seawalls, rivers were changing course. In small island developing states, and this goes back to what Dr. Leo was saying, nature itself, mangroves, reefs, floodplains, forests, wetlands, that's our frontline protection. So we have to plan around that. We have to understand that nature is part of the infrastructure that we have to be able to develop resilience. So I guess the first thing is we have to change the first question that we ask. The first question can no longer be what concrete structures do we build? It must be what mix of mangroves, reefs, coastal setbacks, drainage, floodplain restoration, and engineered reinforcement will protect people the fastest for the full life of the project, and with the most co-benefits such as fisheries, clean water, and tourism. So basically, we're looking at feasibility studies that should present a nature-based or hybrid option with clear numbers. So how much damage are you going to avoid? What are the co-benefits? Tourism, fisheries, water security, the time to deploy, the cost to maintain, and community ownership. There must be a nature-based solution either upfront or embedded in the project. And if the consultants say no to the nature-based option, they should, I believe, they should have to file a signed memorandum explaining why. Why are they not looking at nature-based as the first? The thing is, our climate is changing, and we have to change with it. We can't continue to use the old paradigm of the past and expect to get different results. So nature-based protection must be the default, not the afterthought. The second thing is we have to make safeguards empowering. So environmental and social impact assessments and environmental and social management plans must treat mangroves, reefs, forests, and watersheds as critical assets, not just pretty scenery. These are now assets. So they should set clear performance targets for those natural systems, require free, prior, and informed consent from the people, the communities who use those fishing grounds or coastal lands, require proper consultation of women and vulnerable groups, include a community complaints process with clear timelines, guarantee benefit sharing for the people who maintain these natural defenses, and include a no net loss and preferably net gain of biodiversity rule with independent verification. So in other words, safeguards must protect people, rights, and functioning ecosystems, not just satisfy a checklist, which is what I think we do right now. You know, we have these safeguards as checklists, but if they are supposed to protect people, they are supposed to protect biodiversity. They're supposed to protect the ecosystems that we depend on for our productive services, and we have to treat them that way.
Thank you so much. Yes,
And I forgot
safeguards.
one bit. We
Okay.
also have to, sorry, we also have to make nature-based projects financially durable. So too many of our nature-based projects die because no one funds maintenance after the ribbon cutting. So we have to pay for performance. So, insurers, tourism operators, and utilities should pay into a resilience credit. If mangroves and reefs are proven to reduce storm damage and prevent business interruption, then there must be a premium paid into that. We have to fast-track permits for living shorelines, things like reef repair. And these things matter because in our climate plans, many countries, especially small island developing states, are now calling oceans, coasts, and blue carbon ecosystems a pillar of national adaptation. But they're also saying very clearly, we can't fund these alone. So I think that has to be part of the new way in which we approach ENS.
Thank you so much. Yes, I think safeguards are really important, and we focus so many times in the ESG checklist. But I want to highlight something that you said, and is understand that nature is part of the equation and not just a list that we need to complete. So with that in mind, I want to ask Ms. Isha, what is the perspective from the government? How is the ministry working with financial institutions to include climate and natural positive criteria into the procurement and the urban development pipelines?
Well, that is also a very important aspect we are tackling at the Ministry of Climate Change and Environment. As I mentioned, our sustainable finance framework guides the ministry in its efforts to ensure climate and nature is embedded into the procurement and development. It steps cooperation between public and the private sector and focuses on climate resilience instruments and climate resilience investment. By the end of 2022, 6 of our major banks had collectively dedicated over $51.8 billion in green procurement and in green financing. So that really the focus for these investments was green technology, renewable energy, and also waste to energy. Let me also share with you a few examples from those banks. For example, First Abu Dhabi Bank has committed to provide $75 billion in green financing by 2030. And if we move to Abu Dhabi Commercial Bank and Emirates MBD, they had joined our Climate Responsible Companies Pledge initiative, which is committing to reduce their carbon footprint and measure and report progress as well. Another initiative or program that was also by Abu Dhabi Islamic Bank, which allocated $1.7 billion to financing sustainable projects. And one of the pillars of its sustainability framework includes sustainable development. So all of those examples that we had in UAE showing that our financial institutions are really mature enough to move toward financing green projects and sustainable projects. And also I want to add to the list the Mashriq Bank. Mashriq Bank had already set a goal of supporting sustainable financing and the climate actions by providing $30 billion by 2030. And to conclude with Abu Dhabi Islamic Bank, which has demonstrated unfailing commitment to helping us achieving our long-term sustainability goals. So all of that works that is being done by our financial institutions is showing the potential move toward sustaining a finance toward the green projects and sustainable projects.
Thank you so much for your answer. And you mentioned innovation in what we need to think, and that's part of what we need to include now in the equation. So I want to continue asking Dr. Leon, because you have called for a systematic shift in how we define prosperity and value creation. So I want to ask you how can the financial system better capture long-term resilience and social outcomes within traditional notions of return and creditworthiness?
The first is, I think we note that when long-term stability is measured, verified, and rewarded through pricing, in the underwriting process, then resilient projects become low-risk part of portfolios. And that is where we need to focus. And the starting point for us is we should look at balance sheets, not budgets. We too often focus on budgets and not on the balance sheet. Now, why are we saying this? Is credit assessments need to be beyond cash flow coverage of today and focus more on wealth preservation and risk reduction tomorrow. And that can only come through if we look at a balance sheet that includes human, natural, and produced capital as one. And I think to be able to do that, four things can potentially help. The first is what we now use net present value to discount and give value to future streams. We should make those nature adjusted project net present values. And what that will actually do is it will provide portfolios with climate value at risk measures that can now allow you to assess credit and therefore the cost of capital appropriately. The second is we need, as Dr. Fletcher was saying, resilience-linked covenants that will automatically adjust terms independently based on verifiable outcomes. The third is we need to recognize what we are calling ecosystem assets so that they can serve as collateral and guarantees in blended finance structures. And lastly, credit ratings. We need to now be talking about resilience notches in credit ratings, whereby as you outcome improvements in resilience, that translates into improved credit ratings because you are literally investing and delivering about tomorrow in a future state.
Thank you so much for your answer. And I think it's really important how we integrate nature in our normal systems. And with that, I want to ask Mr. Hiroshi, we know that CAF is deploying a range of instruments and advisory services to maintain resilience. So what financing mechanisms or blended finance models have proven most effective in ensuring infrastructure projects deliver both climate adaptation and nature positive outcomes?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the question. I think we have two different levels to cooperate with our member countries. First is the technical assistance. We decided as a bank to use the profit of the year in a fund for the next year to do technical assistance in the feasibility studies of the project. As Dr. James mentioned before, one of the more important priorities is to have well-structured projects that we can deploy in a very safe way. Then we are investing in that in the countries, and there is the way of kind of grants that goes to the countries for the feasibility studies. And in terms of instruments that we are deploying, we have different types. First, we are leveraging our financial strengths, and we have been working in green bonds emissions. In our program since 2018, we have issued around $2 billion in green bonds that are coming from climate and biodiversity related projects, and some of them are from climate resilient infrastructure projects. Also, we did this year our first blue bond emission of $100 million with UNDP, and has a very successful emission, and as well our first sustainable bond of $1.5 billion that has around 19 times the demand in the market, and is something that we see that is a very strong appetite for the investors. In terms of blended finance, we have been working with different structures combining concessional resources, guarantees, and commercial lines to make adaptation and nature positive projects bankable. One important thing is, as we are implementing agency of the GCF and the GEF and the Adaptation Fund, we're working very closely with them to try to cooperate in different modalities. One example is our project with GCF for Galapagos Islands in Ecuador. This is a very important project that we see that the island will have self-sufficient and low carbon development model. And this is a project of around $117 million that CAF is cooperating with 30 million senior loan, and we have around $200,000 as a grant in the technical cooperation assistance. We have other programs and innovative financial solution. What is the debt for nature and debt conversions operations? One example is the Rio La Lempa transaction in El Salvador last year. That is the biggest debt swap for a river. This was an operation of around $1 billion with DFC. And our calculation is in this transaction, El Salvador will save around $350 million that will be directed, invested in the ecosystem restoration program of the river, and CAF will be acting as the structure and guarantor of the operation. Other important instrument that we have is a link to climate and social objectives comprehensive loans. That is a kind of new generation PBL that we are doing with the countries, and this is basically giving to the country a reduction of the rate up to 8 years when they achieve the sustainable targets in that loan. We have a first operation in that type of $300 million with the Mexican government. Another important facility that we're doing is working with the private bank. One example is with the BBVA from Spain. We launched last year a private line of $50 million, basically to give to this private sector opportunities to adapt to the requirements of the European Union in green regulations, and this is something that we deploy already on the line, and we decided to renew for other $50 million with the same bank. Then this is some of the sample of different structures that we're working in the bank, and we're trying to be more creative and to try to adapt in the different figures that we need for these challenges.
Thank you so much. I think these innovative solutions will help us to finance more activities. But now I want to move back to what the government is doing. And Ms. Isha, I want to ask you how the ministry is working with financial institutions and developers to include climate and nature positive criteria into the procurement systems, the project pipelines, and the urban development.
Sure. I think that through the examples that I covered just in the previous question of how our financial institutions are allocating budgets and are allocating financial contribution to cover or to finance the sustainable projects and embedding that criteria within the allocation conditions itself. So maybe we can also cover an important aspect in here, which is related to the capacity building that needed to be actually done both at financial institution level and also at other stakeholders who are engaged in here. So that is in UAE, we are adopting a strategy or a policy that for all of our strategies, we have to bring everyone on board and to make sure that everyone is joining that journey. And developing countries, I think, must ensure that any capacity building draws on the unique local knowledge that exists in the region itself. That is very important because the upskilling from within is really essential in this regard. Climate resilience must be embedded, and that is what is happening actually in our country. It must be embedded into the foundations of a planning, and so the plans must start with actually climate resilience. Our planning approach in UAE is guided by a long-term vision, and in United Arab Emirates, the private sector itself is heavily involved in the urban development in a way that has led to excellence in the development of a climate-smart solutions. And that also we have also to make sure that we don't forget to bring academia and also other stakeholders, like for example, the young category or the youth category on board in this aspect, to make sure that all of them are engaged and everyone is extremely beneficial from that. So clusters of specialized experts and specialized expertise ensure a focused approach and a clearly defined investment opportunities. So I thought of covering this point in this question because already I gave, I think, few examples of the financial institutions, and I thought that we need really to highlight the importance of the capacity building and specifically the local capacity building.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I will highlight that bring everyone on board. Academia, local communities, GGGI, everyone here. So to close this panel, I want to ask Dr. Fletcher, if you could modify 3 aspects of project financing and risk sharing within CARICOM, ensuring that every dollar contributes to build resilience and restore nature, which aspects will you select?
Thank you. That's an excellent question. I think, first of all, I would recommend that we move away from a project-by-project to a regional protection framework. And what I mean by that is, I think we need a regional resilience facility for the Caribbean that puts in place fast-paying insurance for wind, for storm surge and flooding, so that when disaster hits, power, water, telecommunications, and the natural coastal defenses that protect our shores get emergency money immediately. So what is different between this and the parametric insurance that we have right now, the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, is that that facility is at the state level, and it's to help the government get on its feet. But we need to help ordinary people get on their feet, and that very often is left behind. But we also need to be able to restore the ecosystems that have been damaged, and that's why this is a kind of parametric microinsurance for small business, for homeowners, but also to help us restore coastal defenses. And it should also have a rapid reconstruction line that triggers automatically after a hurricane like Melissa. And why? Because in the first 30 days after a Category 4 or Category 5 hurricane, you cannot wait for slow approvals from distant capitals. You need money now to keep clinics open, to clear roads, to pump water and put people back on the roof. In Jamaica, as many as 77% of residents lost electricity, hospitals were damaged, landslides and floods cut communities off. If these people have to wait for 18 months before they get support, what will happen is that they will use whatever means are at their disposal and they will build back, but they will not build back better. So they will put themselves in the same vulnerable position that they were before the hurricane. So I think that's the first thing that we have to do. Secondly, we need to pay for results that matter to people. So climate finance should reward real outcomes. Hours that power and water stayed on during and after a storm. Kilometers of coastline not washed away because mangroves and reefs were restored. Days of tourism operations that were saved because wave heights and surge levels were lower. We can turn these avoided losses into resilience credits that are backed partly by insurers and partly by the tourism industry itself that is benefiting from it. So that makes resilience a revenue stream, kind of very similar to what Dr. Leo has been speaking about, not just a moral argument. It also funds the long-term upkeep of mangroves, of reefs and wetlands, and the natural systems that protect us. And thirdly, I would bake debt relief at affordable terms into every climate finance package for small island developing state. Every storm like Melissa creates new debt. You borrow to repair electricity grids, water systems, ports, roads and housing just to get back to where you were the day before the storm. But your economy has just taken a hit. Your revenue is down and lenders now think you are riskier. So they raise your cost of borrowing, and that's a vicious loop that can end up in insolvency. So we must build in automatic disaster clauses, so payment pause when you're hit, concessional terms that are based on vulnerability, and debt for resilience swaps. And this really should not be controversial. It's recognizing that climate disasters for us are also fiscal disasters. If we keep financing recovery merely with new debt, we are financing state failure. So really, going into Belém, these are some of the things I think we need to impress upon the presidency of COP30 and on all of the negotiators that we need a pathway to rapid grant-like funding, a regional resilience facility, and clear acceptance that debt relief and concessional terms are not charity. They are part of a workable financial system in a world that is overshooting 1.5. And maybe if I can put a 3.5, it is how we deal with procurement. Right now, we deal with procurement in awarding the bid to the lowest bidder. That should not be the case, because the lowest bidder, that fails long before you get to 100 miles an hour. We need now to put a premium on resilience. So we need to understand that by shortchanging ourselves, by financing the projects the way we're financing them, we are really contributing to our own demise. So that is probably what I'd also lay in there.
Thank you so much, and thank you, all of you, for all your answers. I want to conclude saying that we start with ideas of how to integrate nature into infrastructure. We know that we need to consider the covenants, the ESG standards, then we need to translate that into policy. And for that, of course, we need finance. So let's think together how we can find this finance with new innovative solutions and make sure that the results are in all of the countries. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kata, and thank you to all the panelists. We now get into the last panel of the day. Thank you all for being here. It was a long week, it was a long day, right? Thank you especially to the panelists. It's not easy to get into a discussion at 5:45 on Thursday after such a long week. So we really appreciate you taking the time and the courage. I didn't touch it. So we get into the last panel of the day, panel 3. I think it almost needs no introduction based on the conversation that we had until now, right? We've heard a lot about risks. We've heard about this vicious circle where countries that are highly exposed to nature and climate-related financial risks see their fiscal space under high stress and have limited financial resources available to address these risks. And this is what the last panel of today is about. We're going to be looking into how do we address the triple crisis of biodiversity, of climate, and debt sustainability. The session is going to be moderated by Tatiana Escobar, GGGI's Andean representative. Tati, if you want to take your seat and introduce our panelists.
Thank you, Ferro. Thanks for the introduction, and I'm just gonna thank everyone again for being here on a Thursday afternoon after the busy week that all we have had. I'm gonna keep it tight and short, but interesting and fun, as Kata said. So I'm just gonna call the panelists. First, Ms. Patricia Hidrobo, the Vice Minister of Economy of Ecuador. Welcome, Patricia, welcome to the panel. I'm also going to call Mr. Esrom Emmanuel, Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Finance of Fiji. Welcome, Mr. Esrom. Also, I would like to call Mr. Jamin Kwan, the Country Manager for Korea S&P Global Rating. Welcome, Mr. Kwan. And last but not least, Ms. Tobias Ogweno, Head of Environment and Climate Change Division from Minister of Foreign Affairs from Kenya. I think Tobias is just entering the room. Welcome. So we are finalizing our day, and we have heard really interesting conversations that, as Ferro mentioned it, and the rest of our colleagues during their interventions, we're gonna talk about that triple trap. Actually, our panel is called Breaking the Triple Trap, on how all the countries are entering in that cycle of climate vulnerability, biodiversity loss, and unsustainable debt. And to address this triple trap and to find ways, we need creativity. We need new ways to address them. We need innovation, and I think that's why this panel is going to bring what this panel is going to bring us today. So I'm going to start with a general question to all of you, and then we move to more specific ones, and then we're going to close the panel. As I told everyone, I'm going to try to keep it really tight. So, given what Ferro presented to us and we have been discussing, there is a growing pressure of sovereign debt and an urgent need to finance climate resilient, sustainable development as biodiversity conservation. We will love to hear from each of the countries and from S&P as well. What are your institutions or country prioritizing to tackle this complex issue and this complex situation where we are? I'm going to start with Patricia, Vice Minister of Economy and Finance from Ecuador. Welcome, Patricia.
Thank you, Tatiana. Thank you for all of us, for your presence here. For us, it's really important to share the experience of Ecuador in this topic, and I love the breaking the triple trap. I love the topic of this meeting. Okay, first, thank you for your question. As a Minister of Economy and Finance of Ecuador, we are working to align the fiscal sustainability with climate and nature goals through three important key aspects. The first one, as I mentioned yesterday, we are using the clear policy and market standards. Is the first and more important one. For example, we launched the Sovereign Green Bond Framework in 2023, fully aligned with the ICMA principles, which ensures transparency, eligibility criteria, and impact reporting. Second, important as well, we are leveraging financial innovation to manage debt and mobilize capital. Ecuador has carried out two landmark Debt for Nature, where we are pioneer to Debt for Nature swaps, as many people mentioned in the last panel, in Galapagos in 2023, and the Amazon Via Corridor in 2024. Two important and remarkable swaps for Ecuador, which have generated significant fiscal savings and establish a long-term conservation funds. Is important, that mix. And third, looking forward, we are developing three important key instruments. The first one is the National Green Taxonomy. The second one is the Sustainable Bond Framework, and the other one is the Amazon Bond Framework. All of these will channel resources into projects with measurable environmental and social outcomes. Of course, I need to recognize this in this moment that all of this was made possible thanks to GGGI support. Without your support was impossible. So this is my experience from Ecuador.
Thanks, Vice Minister. Thanks for the intervention and the recognition as well. Now we would like to hear from Esrom Emmanuel, Assistant Minister of the Minister of Finance of Fiji.
Thank you for the questions. For countries like Fiji and small Pacific Island countries, climate shocks are frequent and recovery costs are quite high. We have traditional disaster funding, however, it's often too slow and unpredictable. So we have parametric in Fiji, we have parametric insurance, which has become an important part of our risk management policy. Currently it covers our farmers, mainly the sugarcane farmers and rice farmers, and as well as pensioners, welfare pensioners that are covered. In that, we involve the private companies, private insurance companies as insurers, and government funded the premiums as well as subsidized by the insurers. And the second instrument that we have on a national level, it's called Pacific Catastrophe Risk Insurance, or PCRIC in short. So Fiji has access to coverage that triggers payment based on the scale of an event. So this covers Fiji and some member countries of the Pacific Islands. So this mechanism provides rapid liquidity, helping whichever countries to respond faster to the risk. And the premiums or the contribution are paid for by the member countries and subsidized by Australia, New Zealand, EU, and other developed countries. So the payouts go directly to support the emergency operation and often assist national government as well as subnational government. And then we have what is called the Pacific Resilience Facility, and this is for the Pacific as a whole, and this is in the pipeline. However, we expect this facility to be fully operation in 2026. So that is funded or established with assistance of Australia, US, UK, China, Turkey, and Latvia. So the purpose is to help vulnerable Pacific people exposed to climate change and disaster risk to be more resilient. Build resilience, preparedness, and adaptation capacity of the poor before the disaster strikes. So it's a resilient instrument. So all Pacific to invest in small grant-based but high-impact projects and to make community disaster ready. So resilience. And it's a self-sustaining model. It won't result in debt for all the countries, including Fiji. And it's deliver the grants quickly and efficiently, distributing finance through the national payout system. As I mentioned, currently we are collecting, establishing secretariat with the funding as well. We expect some funding this year, around $250, and then another $250 in the following year. And we expect the first grant to be paid in 2026. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Emmanuel. Now, it's really interesting to hear from a different perspective. So, Mr. Kwon, we would like to know from S&P Global Rating, how are you addressing and tackle these issues?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting S&P to this great panel. Yeah, as you know, we are the only company from the private sector, and I guess our role is slightly different from yours. So, how S&P Global Ratings are contributing to the society on this issue is more like intrinsic value of what we are providing to the market. We aim to provide the best quality rating on objective and independent research. We will continue to do so in this conventional rating as well as sustainable finance work. Additionally, what we aim to do is we try to increase and improve the communication to the market participant, and so that all the market participants understand our rationale of the rating action, and also our methodology clearly before and after, so that all the well-drafted, well-designed project, well-designed, well-executed and monitored project deserve a good rating and deserve a good treatment from the market. Additionally, what we aim to do is we try to improve or increase the speed to respond to the market when there is an innovative financial instrument coming in from the market. We try to find a way to develop our new methodology to provide relevant credit rating to the market on a timely basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gwen, and thanks for sharing what you are doing from S&P. And now, Mr. Tobias, Head of Environment of Climate Change Division from the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Kenya. We would love to hear your approach.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Just to give a disclaimer that I've listened very carefully from the start of these panels, and these are very technical discussions, very informative. But I guarantee you I will try. I don't work at the National Treasury, but I have some ideas that I would like to share. So first and foremost, I want to say that we cannot talk about sustainable finance without talking about inclusivity, without talking about resilience, and without talking about environmental integrity. Those three things are distinct but interrelated. Because in countries where there is no strong resilience, in countries where there is no inclusivity, and in countries where environmental integrity is heavily compromised, that country must slip into debt. Having said that, a high debt, a slow growth, and rising climate risks have created a trap of austerity and vulnerability. Therefore, fiscal tightening alone cannot deliver the results that the world needs. Overall, there is need to shift from short-term fiscal compression to a growth and resilient-based debt strategy that safeguards prosperity, social inclusion, and climate targets. A debt for growth and resilience strategy must be anchored in a strong fiscal policy, targeted investments, and effective debt management, which offers a viable path to prosperity and stability. In Kenya, we have aligned our sovereign financing framework with sustainability outcomes, ensuring that each instrument we issue out supports both fiscal stability and green growth. Currently, the government of Kenya is exploring sustainability-linked bonds as part of this approach, instruments that tie borrowing cost directly to measurable progress on key indicators such as renewable energy generation, forest restoration, and emission reduction. As all of you may be aware, Kenya is 93% powered by green energy, 93% renewables. And we target to reach 100% by 2030. So most of the bonds we issue are directed towards green growth. The National Treasury has been working very closely with the World Bank, the African Development Bank, and other international financing institutions to come up with other instruments. For example, collectively, they have developed the National Green Fiscal Incentive Policy 2 years ago, which prioritizes implementation of a coherent suite of green fiscal actions to exploit the opportunities of accelerating the transition to a low carbon development pathway and offering other opportunities. The second thing they have done together is formulation of the green bond policy framework to guide issuance of green bonds, to support Nairobi Stock Exchange listing rules for green and blue bonds, as well as to support sovereign green bond framework. The government of Kenya has also developed a green taxonomy and climate risk disclosure framework. These two frameworks are intended to serve as tools to enable market participants classify their economic activities and promote the transition to a green and low carbon economy. On a similar fashion, Kenya has also developed frameworks and issuance of sustainability-linked bonds that will enable issuance of the bond later in the year. This will be the first sustainability-linked bond issued in Africa. So, in short, the vision of the government of Kenya is to mainstream the sustainability across our entire debt management strategy, as has already been outlined in our medium-term strategy for 2025-2026. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you all for sharing your strategies and how we are all approaching this crisis and these issues that are really complex. It is clear for all your answers that to tackle this, we would need innovation, we would need resilience. It seems like we are all identifying that we need also credibility and good signals for the market as well. And you all mentioned what you're doing, but I would like to go a little bit deeper on each of these strategies. I'm just going to start with Ecuador. I know pretty well these transactions, but Vice Minister, it would be really interesting for the audience and for everyone to listen from Ecuador. Ecuador has become a global reference after implementing this or after structuring these two commercial debt for nature swaps. I think are the largest one in Galapagos and the BioCorridor in the Amazon. So it would be really interesting from your perspective. What have been the main benefits of the operation for this long-term biodiversity conservation, the challenges, and what you can share with the audience and the panelists about this experience?
Thank you for the questions. Long-term dedicated funds brings lasting benefits for both conservation and fiscal policy, I think for four reasons, specific reasons. First, it provides predictability and scale. I think that I talked before or yesterday about that. But for example, Galapagos and Amazon swaps for debt nature secure nearly the 900 million for marine and forest conservation in Ecuador. A huge amount for our country, for a small country in Latin America, allowing for long-term programmatic actions instead of isolated projects. It's really important, that part. Second, it enhances fiscal resilience. Together, these two operations generate about 2 billion in savings, while directly channeling funds to protect biodiversity. I don't know if you visit Galapagos, if you know this beautiful paradise. So we are channeling funds directly to the conservation of the islands. Third, it ensures institutional continuity. Important, because we have established an independent funds like Galapagos Life Fund and the Amazon BioCorridor Fund to guarantee transparency and oversight beyond political cycles. And finally, it builds investor confidence. As we discussed yesterday, trust is crucial, and these initiatives position Ecuador as a reliable and innovative partner in the nature financing. These are all main conclusions of the operations.
Thanks, Vice Minister. I think Ecuador is a great example on how different dimensions, fiscal, institution, and nature conservation can actually align and recognize the hard work that you have been doing pushing this forward. Now, Mr. Esrom Emmanuel, this question is for you. You have mentioned the different strategies that from Fiji are addressing from the different perspectives, the parametric insurance, the climate resilient debt clauses as well. And the states like Fiji and other countries may be facing the similar issues and they're developing similar strategies as well. We would like to to hear from you what are the opportunities and challenges that you see in scaling these instruments and their use in small countries and small islands like Fiji.
Thank you. For Fiji, in our view, those new instruments potentially transformative for debt vulnerable countries like Fiji and the Pacific Island countries. So Fiji has advocated for the inclusion of flexibility in debt structures because climate change can abruptly shift national priorities from long-term investments to immediate crisis response. To scale the use, two things are critical for Fiji. First, for development partners and lenders, they need to mainstream these clauses across all new financing agreements, not as experimental features, but as standard practice. And we are thankful for current lenders for assisting us in the new debt financing that we undertook. Second is we need technical assistance to ensure the tools are designed in line with specific exposure and our fiscal conditions. The opportunity is clear. They can turn debt into a tool for resilience rather than a burden that deepens our vulnerability. But the challenge remains for Fiji and the Pacific Islands. So, to ensure that all lenders, including private ones, embrace the same principle of flexibility and shared responsibility in managing the climate risk. Thank you.
Thank Mr. Esrom. It is quite clear that we need to keep our minds open and flexible in order to address these complex issues. I would like to pass to Mr. Kwan, and you guys play a key role in shaping investors' perception. We previously discussed how important is credibility and signs to the market. So for us, it would be really important to hear how does S&P Global considers climate related financial risk, and how does include biodiversity within your credit rating? How are you doing it, and can you share with us your experiences from S&P?
Yeah, the climate change is a significant area of focus on our credit ratings analysis. Basically, it is reflected in many ways into those different components of our rating. For example, industry risk analysis, competitive position analysis, and also future cash flow model. We reflect that into reflect a climate change or climate risk into the rating. So in our analysis, we evaluate how well the rated entities prepared for the climate change, and we conduct a climate scenario-based analysis to explore the potential consequences of climate change. For some industries, it's obvious, and it's more climate risk is more material to them. For example, oil and gas exploration and production industry. Actually, in 2021, it has downgraded massively due to the climate risk. But for other industries, before we factor in climate-related risk, we have to do so-called materiality test, because climate transition and physical risk is not the only risk that we assess for the overall credit quality. We have many other factors to consider, including liquidity and debt leverage and so on and so on. So we try to determine whether climate risk is material enough to have over impact on the overall credit worthiness. But inherent uncertainty about this climate is regarding magnitude and impact of climate change on the individual issue of credit rating, along with the very long-term nature of climate change. It's quite uncertain, and it complicates the financial impact analysis. So what we do is we evaluate credit impact of climate change. We consider balance between investment cost, execution risk, and potential benefit to arrive credit rating. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you, thank you. Now, Mr. Tobias, you mentioned some of the strategies you're using. You mentioned the sustainability linked bond and how you are leverage the sustainable finance throughout the position where Africa is right now with risk premiums narrowing down. But in terms of how are you, because you mentioned you're addressing the sustainability linked bond to attract more investment, we would like to know how are you also doing to integrate or embedded other instruments as climate and biodiversity within the national budget. You mentioned something about taxonomy, but how are you doing it and how has been your experience in Kenya?
Right, thank you very much, moderator. Let me say that Kenya is a climate sensitive country. Our economy is very climate sensitive. And we are also big on tourism. So whenever we have serious perturbation of the climate, we have serious issues with our economy. Having said that, we do not look at climate and biodiversity as an environment issue alone. We look at it in terms of environment, economic, and a fiscal priority. And this we do because we recognize the fact that for us to be able to achieve microeconomic stability and inclusive growth, we must address the whole spectrum of the issues around this. So because of that, my government has taken deliberate steps to do a few issues with regard to the national budgeting processes that makes to climate-proof the economy. So one of the things that the government has done is to create climate budget targeting. So through our national treasury, they have developed a tool for the climate budget targeting that integrates climate considerations into budget processes. The climate budget targeting provides a framework for identifying, measuring, monitoring, and reporting the climate-related revenues and expenditures, thereby enhancing our ability to monitor progress and make well-informed decisions in achieving national climate change objectives and international commitments. I said this because you see, like Africa largely is a water-stressed continent, and for those that have been following what is happening, sometimes we get so much of the rains, sometimes we get a long period of drought. So all these two kind of extremes affect the way our budgeting cycle works. The second thing that the government has done is to integrate public investment and planning to embed climate and biodiversity risk screening into our national development planning, as well as in the public investment management processes. Some of the major projects must be climate resilient. They must be nature positive before receiving budgetary approval. This approach helps us to prevent fiscal pressures from climate-related losses. And to this end, the government established the Public Investment Management Directorate to coordinate this kind of actions. The third thing that my government has done as a way of strategy to navigate around the complexities of these issues at the subnational level is to mainstream and prioritize climate mobilizing financing at the local level. We have in Kenya what we call the Financing Locally Led Climate Action, FLOCA, that actually takes money to the hands of people on the ground. So those who wants to build, who wants to plant trees, who wants to do agronomy, the government takes money to them to be able to complement. So they have environmental resilience as well as also food and security. So that is one of the things that we do. And for that, we thank the World Bank, the government of Sweden and Denmark for coming on board to be able to work with Kenya in that area. The next thing that my government has also done is to regards with fiscal and financial incentives. Kenya has aligned its fiscal instruments to support climate and green outcomes. Currently, we work on a green public procurement framework. We have also developed the Green Fiscal Incentive Framework policy to identify and prioritize the implementation of coherent suite of green fiscal actions that allow us to exploit the opportunities of accelerating transition to a low carbon emission development pathway while enhancing climate resilience and ensuring environmental sustainability. These are very concrete strategies, and which is why in Kenya we open up this space for all investors that want to bring projects that are aligned toward our Vision 2030, that are aligned towards the SDGs, and are aligned towards poverty eradication to be able to come on board. Thank you.
Thank you. We're getting to our end, so I'm just going to leave a final question. But before going to our last question, I would like to reflect on what we have heard. We heard many different innovative instruments. We have heard Debt for Nature swap, parametric insurance. Kenya just shared with us different fiscal and financial mechanisms, budget tagging, and we also heard from the rating agencies how they are including and giving great signals to the market in order to make these new instruments work. So I think we are around the globe working towards innovation and creativity and alignment with the market. And to close, and a final reflection, I would like to hear from each of you just 1 minute, or we're gonna lose the food outside and the fun. If you could prioritize only one action, only one, to integrate biodiversity or climate resilience into public debt management, what would it be in the next decade or years? Go, Vice Minister, go ahead.
Okay, if I had to choose one action, maybe in Ecuador, I would like to integrate the national green taxonomy into the Ecuador sovereign debt program. I think that starting with the Amazon 10 sovereign bond could be the action. It's mean using taxonomy criteria to guide investment choices and to link with the budget and reporting results transparently. I think that this is a practical way to link the debt management with our climate and nature goals, I think.
Thanks. Fiji.
Thanks. With the resilient facilities that we have, Fiji and Pacific Island countries, for Fiji, it will have some fiscal space for it to go into additional debt. However, I would like to move into climate-linked bonds in the future, while ensuring our public finances strengthen, not weaken, and also have a strong environmental foundation. So ultimately, this will be will turn our financial system into tools that protect both the economy and also our natural capital, which is the foundation of our resilience as small island states.
Thank you. Mr. Kwan?
Maybe can I answer in a slightly different way, because our company is a little bit different. My request to the panel member and other member is, please treat us as a friend. We're not bad guys. We are here to help you. So whenever you have whether nature for debt swap or public debt management issue, please involve us as early stage as possible. The only engagement with the rating agency can always help the government to understand potential treatment of possible future swap or possible euro debt restructuring. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Tobias.
Yes, thank you very much. Before I say two things which I think are a priority for Kenya, let me just say this, that many of our countries, especially developing, are getting increasingly saddled in debt. And the debt that is coming as a result of the ideas or issues they're trying to address which contribute to global public goods. A good climate is good for everyone. Sustainable development is good for everyone. Functioning markets is good for everyone. So in a sense, what I'm trying to say, especially that we'll be heading to Belém in the next 1.5 weeks, we need to engage in this discussion around reform of the global financial architecture. We do not believe that developing countries, for example, should be able to pay high debts for goods that are of global public benefits. Those should be concessional loans, or they should be debt-free or grants. So having said that, in the context of the Kenyan priorities, we do believe that there are two things that we can prioritize first. First is the green bonds, which we are beginning to do. We did the first one in 2019. That was absorbed by Van Long, a local company. And the second thing would be about the formulation of fiscal and financial incentives. Those that want to come and invest in Kenya, whether in the green economy, in renewable energy, in climate smart agriculture, you are more than welcome to come and work with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks again to the panel, and for all of you to stay here until 6:15. I'll try to keep it really tight. Thanks for sharing your experiences and your vision, and thanks for everyone staying here. Thank you.
Thank you, Tatiana. Thank you to the panelists. And now we get to the fourth session of today's. I saw Dr. Fletcher now. No, really, thank you all for joining, for taking the time. It was an insightful conversation. I'm going to save you my closing remarks. There is a tour leaving from GGGI's, from the lobby of the building at 6:40. If you're available, I would highly suggest you to join that tour. Yeah, if you haven't signed up yet, let me know and we'll see what we can do about that. Yeah, enjoy your evening. Thank you all.